the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Laws 1975, be advised that notice of this meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board in Town Hall and forwarding to the officially designated newspapers that this meeting would take place at Town Hall at 7:30 p.m. tonight, Tuesday, February 6th. Would you please all rise to salute the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here.
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 Mayor Burson? Here. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? So moved. May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I just want to remind everybody, thank you all for coming. I know we have a jam-packed agenda tonight. But I just want to remind everybody that this is a business meeting, so we would appreciate letting us get our business done, and you will all, the public, have an opportunity to make their statements later on. Okay, reports. Jackie?
Yes, two things. I want to let everyone in the community know that on March 7th, sponsored by the Arboretum, Dara Horn, our local prolific author and Short Hills resident, will be speaking about her new book, Eternal Life. Donations are $18 a person, and it will be held at the Arboretum at 7 p.m. And I'd also like to announce that we will be organizing Millburn Township Partners, a launch of a new internship program with Town Hall and our high school. Initially, we're looking at a high school student, a sophomore or junior, that will have the opportunity to work in Town Hall, learn more about municipal government. The emphasis is going to be on social media, web posting, community engagement. We anticipate that that would be about 5 to 8 hours per week for the student. The job description will be posted in the next day or so on the township website, and will also be in Millburn High School. So we look forward to having one of our own in the trenches. Thank you.
I don't have any reports. I'm just wondering, Sam Levy's not here in the report from the Rec Commission. Would you be speaking to that? Or there's a couple of just things I wanted to put on the record. Okay. So, as you know, I once brought up the idea of changing the leash law in Taylor Park, and there doesn't seem to be enough commitment from the rec department on that, but I still would like to pursue that. I've heard a lot of people who would be interested in that, so it's something we can work on. And they referenced again replacing the par 3 with multiple turf fields, and last week, well, the last meeting, Committeeman Levy said that it's something that was brought up years and years ago with the Board of Ed, would probably never happen. So I was still just wanting to put it back in the public. It's something that I think would be very negative for the town, but since the rec department is still discussing it, I'd like to make sure that it keeps in the public eye, that they're still talking about it. And that's it.
Okay. Scotty, anything?
Yes, a few things. Downtown Millburn Development Association is having their quarterly meeting on Tuesday, February 13th at the Bauer Center in the fireplace room. So there's some interest of the public in attending because they're about to announce their new budget. Please attend on Tuesday.
What time is
6 o'clock. I had the pleasure of attending out the Bauer Center this weekend a competition by Bits and Bites. Somebody's town resident, Arnav Sharma, was able to get a grant from Disney, and he actually used it to have a whole competition where they engaged many town residents, students, and they had a beautiful competition this weekend, and they did a really good job, and they did really nice work. And there was a lot of volunteers from the community, and it was my pleasure to go see what was going on. Also, on Friday, we had a new bookstore open in town, so do yourself a favor, as they say, and get some books there. That wasn't my idea, that wasn't my own, but it's cute. And Sunday night upcoming, we will have Chinese New Year celebration in the middle school. And high school, and there is this year fireworks. I will give you the agenda. Yeah, sorry. Here it is, Lunar New Year, and it's the year of the rooster, and from 2 to 8, there will be games, lion dance, and food tasting, a variety show from 4:15, and 7:30 to 8, fireworks at the high school. And that's it for me.
Yeah, just two brief reports, Mayor. We've been getting a lot of questions, concerns regarding Route 124 westbound. I just wanted to announce publicly that we received confirmation from the New Jersey Department of Transportation that they will be milling and paving from Short Hills Avenue all the way to the Chatham line on 124, both east and westbound. That work is expected to be commenced in the late spring, early summer, and probably won't be completed until late summer, early fall. And it is anticipated that work will be done at night. I also want to just give the committee an update that the police set up a few enforcement details throughout the township over the last 3 weeks, and had some success, I guess, in at least making some traffic stops in the sense that there was about 148 tickets written in that time period.
Good, that's what everybody wants. Okay, so I had a conference call today with the Mayor's Council for the Rollway River Watershed, with Senator Menendez, who gave us a bit of an update on his conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers. He was successfully obtained a waiver of the 3x3x3 requirement before it lapses. He's got hopefully a commitment that they're going to begin a detailed analysis of the dam in the reservation immediately, because the Army Corps is making cost-benefit analyses without the benefit of having actually done a dam analysis. And he's also got a commitment that the Army Corps would start working with the state of New Jersey toward resolution of what he referred to as the Rollway River Basin flooding. He doesn't have a timeline yet, and that the Mayor's Council is putting together a plan to go to Washington, D.C. on February 28th, and hopes to have a timeline ready. So some positive news on that front. Do you have any reports for us?
I do not.
Thank you.
Not right now, later.
Okay. All right. Minutes. Let's review December 5, 2017 regular minutes, special minutes, and December 19th special minutes and regular minutes. May I have a motion to approve the December 5th, 2017 regular township committee minutes? So moved. May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Abstentions?
Abstain on the 19th
Okay.
and the 5th.
May I have a motion to approve the December 5th special township committee minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? May I have a motion to approve the December 19th regular township committee minutes?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Abstain.
May I have a motion to approve the December 19th, 2017 special township committee minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? George, I saw you here somewhere. County Representative.
Good evening, George Serio, Essex County. Just want to announce this Saturday at Cody Arena, there will be a Winter Olympic skating exhibition. Winter Olympics start Friday in South Korea. And this event will be free. There will be speed skating demonstrations, figure skating, as well as ice hockey. And the New Jersey Devils mascot, NJ Devil, will be there as well. And that event takes place from 3:45 to 5:15. And once again, it's a free event right here close by in South Mountain.
Thank you. Okay. Before we get to the consent agenda, we're going to be removing the resolution 18054, the support traffic pattern pilot program Main Street and Ridgewood Road. The reason we are removing it is it has the wrong time frame. We talked about at our last meeting that the South Mountain, Washington ad hoc supported a pilot of No Right on Red from Ridgewood to Main Street in the South Mountain section between the hours of 7 and 9 in the morning and 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and the resolution has a misprint of 2 to 6 in the afternoon. So we're going to take that out, we're going to amend it, but we're going to pass the resolution as amended. Right? Okay. All right. Are there any comments from the committee or public with respect to any of the items listed on the consent agenda? And the consent agenda items have to do with authorizing tax overpayments, investment of the prepayment, reduction of performance bonds for the site work at 233 Canoe Brook for 233 Canoe Brook Associates LLC and for 201 Partners LLC. Authorize advertisement of bids for summer baseball camp. Authorize a one-year optional contract for maintenance and operation of municipal golf course. Authorize execution of certified local government program agreement, which I will talk about a little bit. Approve collective bargaining agreement with PBA Local 34, the Police Benevolent Association. Approve collective bargaining agreement with SOA Local 34A, Superior Officers Association. Establish the 2018 sewer tax rate, approval of raffle licenses, and to approve a closed session immediately following this regular meeting for current and potential litigation involving insurance coverage arbitration in connection with the Thigh Center suit and other matters, consolidated cases, and property acquisition. Before you do that, let me just read my statement, and then we'll take comments. We have a resolution 18-051. On the agenda of tonight's meeting is a resolution 18051, that authorizes the execution of an agreement between the Township of Millburn, State of New Jersey Historic Preservation Office, and the New Jersey DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. This agreement will designate Millburn as a CLG, or Certified Local Government. The certification qualifies the township to annually apply for Federal Historic Preservation Fund matching grants available only to CLGs. Comment on National Register Historic Places nominations and receive priority technical assistance from the Historic Preservation Office. In return, the township agrees to maintain its Historic Preservation Commission and ordinance in accordance with the state's CLG program guidelines. During the past year, Barton Ross, our HPC consultant, worked with several contacts at the state of New Jersey to help us move toward this goal, and together with a letter that I was required to submit on behalf of the township, a CLG application was also submitted and approved. On January 8th, I received notification from Jonathan Kinney, the state senior historic preservation specialist, that the NJDEP would recommend Millburn's acceptance into the Certified Local Government Program. This is an exciting step forward towards our historic preservation goals and a prestigious distinction for Millburn, given that only 45 communities in the state have currently been named CLGs, and Millburn Township will be the first community so designated in over 5 years. Okay. Mr. Kirsch?
Bill Kirsch, 93 Cedar Street. I had a question about the collective bargaining agreements. Who negotiates these agreements for the township?
I do.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions with respect to the consent agenda items? Hearing none? Seeing none. I have a motion to approve the resolutions listed on the consent agenda, with the exception of 18054?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Linderberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mayor Bursky? Yes. Thank you. Okay, may I have a motion to approve 18054 as amended to read, no right on red, for the period of 7 to 9 in the morning and 2 to 4 in the afternoon?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Linderberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mayor Bursky? Yes. Does any member of the committee have any comment with respect to Resolution 18058, which authorizes the township officials to take action and designate bond anticipation?
Mayor, this had to do with complete streets.
Yes, this is, yes, this is a funding mechanism to pay for the debt associated.
We can't hear you.
It is a funding mechanism to pay for the debt associated with complete streets, correct?
So looking at this letter, this was the first portion of complete streets, $4,246,000 and $3,577,000. You just want to maybe review exactly what this, the amount was the 8.349, like how this affects the town, how this affects taxes, or just to give some details on this for the public?
Yeah, so the bond anticipation note is for approximately $8.3 million. This is a short-term financing of debt associated with various township projects, inclusive of complete streets, also inclusive of some drainage projects in South Mountain area, and road improvements and things like that. At this point, our debt service is not, and this is just generally speaking, but not impacting the tax rate. And so this is just our way of being able to pay our debts.
Thank you.
So this is a one-year note.
Correct.
So it expires for the public, it expires in February 1st of 2019.
Correct.
Any other questions or comments? May I have a motion to approve Resolution 18058?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Linderberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mayor Bursky? Yes. Okay. I would like to present an ordinance entitled Township of Millburn, ordinance number 2492-17, an ordinance changing the name of a portion of Newburgh Road to Millburn Way in Millburn Township of New Jersey. The purpose of this ordinance is to rename a portion of Newburgh Road to Finneran Way with an additional honorarium sign thereunder entitled Scoutmaster Ken Finneran. This was a process that started sometime last year when we sent a challenge or a civics lesson, shall we call it, to the schools to rename a portion of Canoebrook so there would no longer be confusion with having Canoebrook on either side of,
JFK Parkway.
no, not
Short Hills
just
Mall.
Short Hills Mall, or, I was going to say Canoebrook, but the Country Club. So ultimately, the Boy Scouts gathered forces and were able to persuade a majority of the township committee that they would like to name the road for their former scoutmaster, who has had a tremendous impact on not only the current scouts, but many years prior as well. And because of that, we all agreed that we would rename the road Bittern Way with the honorarium Scoutmaster for Bittern Way. With that, I move that this ordinance be taken up and passed on first reading, and that the township clerk be authorized to have the ordinance published in accordance with law in the item and for hearing and final passage on Tuesday, March 6, 2018. May I have a second?
Second.
May I have a vote, please?
Ms. Littleberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Egger?
Yes.
Mayor Barsney?
Yes. Ms. Rosenberg?
I would like to present an ordinance entitled Township of Millburn, ordinance number 2493-18, ordinance to vacate a portion of an existing sanitary sewer easement located at 65 Falmouth Street. So basically what happened with this is the owners of this home were trying to sell the house and realized that there was a 20-foot easement underneath their property that made prospective buyers uninterested in buying the house. Apparently when the owners had a survey, this wasn't on it. So when they brought that to our attention, the ability of the township to vacate that portion of the easement from running under the home is basically cutting out the easement and making the home marketable. So that's all it is.
And the pipe doesn't run under the home, just the easement on the side,
Just the easement.
portion of the easement.
Any questions?
May I have a second?
Second.
Wait,
I didn't-
I'm sorry, you moved
I move that this ordinance be taken up and passed on first reading, and that the township clerk be authorized to have the ordinance published in accordance with law on the item and for hearing and final passage on Tuesday, March 6, 2018.
May I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Linderberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Egger?
Yes.
Mayor Barsney?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Lightler?
The proposed amendment to the traffic ordinance is intended to authorize the installation of an all-way stop sign at the intersection of Rector Street and Spring Street, as well as Church Street and Spring Street. The mayor started a South Mountain, Washington section ad hoc traffic committee, and they have worked with our traffic consultant, Mazer Consultant, and they presented some traffic calming concepts. And with the new Washington school, there's a lot more traffic that we've never had in that area. It's very narrow streets, there's buses, there's carpooling, and they were recommended that an always stop sign there would be a very valuable safety measure. And it would provide additional traffic calming on Spring Street at Church. And it's the recommendation of our consultant. Good? Okay. Be it ordained by the Township Committee of the Township of Millburn in the County of Essex and the State of New Jersey as follows. Article 7 entitled Traffic of the Revised General Ordinances of the Township of Millburn is hereby amended as follows. Section 7-20, Stop Intersections, is amended and supplemented to include the following intersections. Intersection, there'll be a stop sign on Spring Street and Rector Street in all-way stop, and Spring Street and Church Street in all-way stop. Stop sign type R1-1, 30 inches, shall be installed on Spring Street facing northbound and southbound traffic approaching the intersections of Rector Street and Church Street. Section 2. The provisions of this ordinance are severable, and the invalidity of any phase, clause, or part of this ordinance shall not affect the validity or effectiveness of the remainder of the ordinance. Section 3. This ordinance shall take effect after final passage and publication as required by law. Okay. I move that. I will.
A second?
Second.
And the public hearing will be held on March 6th.
That's written on here.
Ms. Linderberg?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Egger?
Yes.
Mayor Barsney?
Yes.
Thank you.
New business. Mr. McDonald.
Yes, just real quick for introduction to the Township Committee, the Fire Department will be looking to propose some revisions to ordinances based on some changes at the state level with regard to permit fees for Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, and Type 4 permits, which are outlined in the state statutes. But, and I think it's just to bring our permit fees in line with the state's. The other change is proposed to be to make sure that now that fireworks are legal in terms of sparklers and things like that, that those are not necessarily used in parks as well. So this would be again, this is just an introduction to what may come. I will provide the community with more information in regard to what they're looking at as the proposed changes, but that's just a brief introduction.
Okay. Now on to old business. Ms. Eglo, Ms. Eglo, and Ms. Rosenberg, you're going to give us your recommendations for proposed regulations regarding chickens on residential properties.
Sure. As a friend said, this is an exceptionally interesting issue for a lot of people in this town. Don't cry foul till I'm done. So chickens, it's been, we're no exception to people wanting to have chickens in their backyards. But there are requirements, and we have been tasked with suggesting to the Township Committee an ordinance that regulates chickens and that does permit chickens, not roosters, with certain exceptions. And I will briefly outline our ordinance. Some other towns are doing it, some other towns ban them. We're trying to take somewhere in between. So basically, we are okay with 3 to 4 chickens. We're okay with no selling of eggs, they're just for your own consumption. Only female chickens. A coop that shelters chickens from predators, no greater than 10 by 10 feet. We require permits, which are going to be given by the township, and I'm not sure about the permit fee. Our lawyer gave us a suggestion of $21. For all this, I think should be a little higher, but the health officer will do. There will be some consent of the neighbors required, because we have some neighbors that are not in favor of loud chickens waking them up in the morning, or chickens actually staying where they belong in the backyard. And I've received nice pictures of chickens marching around in people's houses, and people using coops made of cardboard. I mean, we're not, we would like it to be a little more tasteful for our chickens. No, I'm not done. No slaughtering of any chickens, and no roosters. Obviously, there's a noise ordinance, and we would reiterate that if the chickens are clucking too loudly in the morning because the owners aren't getting them out, they could be fined $1,000 for violation of a noise ordinance, just as a dog that kept barking. And I'll turn it over to you for the rest.
Okay, so this stemmed from one neighborhood in Glenwood, and most of the neighborhoods in Glenwood and South Mountain are not extremely large plots of land. And we looked at Warren, we looked at all different towns, and some had to have a minimum of 1 acre. And we felt that would be punitive, because clearly not many houses in Millburn Hills have an acre. So we said that no covered enclosure, coop or fence enclosure shall be located closer than 20 feet to any property line of the adjacent property. Also, as to the consent of the neighbors, because there have been complaints from this one particular area, that it wouldn't be fair to say, okay, well, now we're going to have the consent of neighbors, and these neighbors would clearly say, no, you are a problem, we don't have chickens. We felt it would be fair to grandfather this in and give them the chance to follow the new ordinance and say, here's the new rules, and you have to get permits, you have to get your approval, your coop has to be built correctly, and your neighbor, we haven't really hashed this out completely. Can the neighbor complain if you're following the ordinance? And these are things that we were going to talk about tonight and try to get some more opinions from the committee and how people feel.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Was there a difference between the 20-foot, you said, to the property line? Is there a difference? Because a lot of the ones that I looked at, there's a difference between a property line and a structure. Were you just doing a flat 20 feet regardless of property line or structure?
That was our original intent. Just on your contiguous neighbor, your neighbor's property.
Okay.
So if you have two people on, you have a neighbor on either side of you and someone behind you, those are the people who are going to be affected by this.
So, and you thought about it because some of our smaller lots are 50 width, so you could
Correct.
still have a 10-foot
Correct.
wide coop on a 50-foot lot.
Right.
Okay. And you don't want to make it retroactive, right?
We want to grandfather
You
in
want
those
grandfather.
who already have chickens and who would be in compliance with the ordinance without requiring their neighbor's consent.
Okay, what about people who might have more than 4 chickens?
They'd have to give them away. No slaughter.
Okay.
Or move to a town with bigger chickens.
I noticed when I went and reviewed some of the other town chicken ordinances, for example, South Orange just currently is engaging in a 6-month pilot program. Since we are kind of charting a new territory, I would recommend, make the same recommendation for a 6-month pilot program. We review it. My concern, one of my concerns is this, the health-related issues with chickens, and that I believe that the fee to have chickens should be higher, because I believe we're going to have a Department of Health protocol that's going to have to be included in the maintenance of these properties. So that's my recommendation.
Mayor, can I answer to that?
So,
Some of the opposition to the chickens is salmonella, because playing with chickens can lead to salmonella. And the free-range chickens were walking around and pooping on other people's lawns, and people are playing basketball, and the black basketball's landing in the feces. We can't have any of that if the chickens stay in the back, so there's less of a health concern if they're not free-range. And apparently the eggs of free-range chickens do taste better, but we're not gonna have free-range eggs.
and also, we have residents with chickens now. What the difference is that we're going to start regulating that rather than not regulating. So I also, my note on my, should be doing a pilot program, and I'm not really sure that it makes sense, because we're going to have the chickens, unless we outlaw them, they're going to be here. The question is, do we regulate? Yes.
I believe South Orange had a pilot program because they had a no chicken ordinance, so they had to start out as a pilot. We have people who have chickens we might not even be aware of because they're being contained and they're not causing a problem. There's no one complaining about them by their neighbors. So to take away someone who's not causing a problem, I think would be punitive and not fair.
We also have some residents who have invested in expensive, we actually visited a coop in town where there was an electronic that opened and closed so that it would happen at an early hour, so not to disturb any neighbors. But if somebody's gonna do that for 6 months, I don't know if they're gonna invest if they know that it might end in 6 months. But I'll defer to Minnie.
I thought about it. I'm not sure that I agree. Since we have the chickens, I'm not sure the pilot program makes a whole lot of sense. But I agree in terms of dollars that we are going to have inspections. And so we're going to have that issue as well. Just, you'll have a chance to comment during the public comment section. Right now, this is just for discussion on the text. Thank you. So those are my thoughts. And with the ordinance needs certainly.
If we do I guess maybe the pilot, when I'm suggesting pilot, is we look at it for 6 months and look at the protocol that we set up and have established, and then make the determination after 6 months what works, what doesn't work, what we need to tweak, no pun intended, and see what's the best, review all the best options for the township. That would be my suggestion. Because we're kind of shooting blind here. We don't know how many people are gonna say, oh gee, I want chickens now, and we're gonna have we don't know if it's gonna be 10 new families of chickens or 40.
Or none.
Or none.
Because if they wanted them, they'd probably have them.
Well,
Unless
Mayor,
they've nothing regulated.
there is a program in Maplewood where they did it by lottery, so that they could control the number of new chicken families. So that is another option, is if we wanted to have a chicken lottery. I'm trying to keep a straight face, so.
This is important, because it is a bit of an unknown. We don't know.
We don't know how many chickens there are now.
Right.
And we'll find out, because people will then probably start telling on their neighbors who have chickens, because if they're not going to self-report. So, like the tickets, we might make a lot of money.
There's no enforcement for dogs even, so please. And dog noise. People having
Oh,
dogs
no,
out
no,
in the
no,
backyard.
this is just for amongst us at the moment, and we're not voting on this, we're not making any determinations
Just a
tonight.
comment.
We're just discussing what we might want. And anybody during the public portion, you have time to come up and make your comments then. Thank you. So really the question is, do we want to do a chicken ordinance? And if so, do we want to basically follow the recommendations of our subcommittee here and have our attorney draft something to incorporate these thoughts? And the thing about a pilot is you can always change an ordinance. So you can establish your ordinance now, and then if in 6 months you say, wow, this really doesn't work, or this, you can then make whatever changes you need.
Well, now that we've presented it, let's see what the public says, and then we can address it in another minute.
Okay. Anything else on this? And chickens, no, now, for what everyone's been waiting for. Okay. The next piece of old business is, so, it's designated proposed development Chatham Woodland Road, which is probably a misdesignation to some degree. What we're going to have is a presentation right now by Mr. Marizzetti, Joe Marizzetti, who is from the offices of, Marizzetti and Falcon?
It's Marizzetti and Falcon.
Marizzetti and
Left
Falcon,
the office.
our township attorneys, and one of Mr. Marizzetti's specialties is redevelopment, land use, redevelopment, et cetera. And he's going to talk to us and explain to us what the options are available to a township committee such as ours when dealing with proposed developments, among other things.
Exactly. And as you can see, I have a PowerPoint coming up in a moment. Let me explain what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. It's kind of a complicated topic, so I prepared some quick slides to walk through. I'm not going to talk about the specific project. I'm going to be talking in terms of the generic possibilities of what the opportunities are for a governing body to address land use and what the alternatives are. What I intend to do is walk through that process. That's not my slide yet. Some of the material is rather small, so I have handouts that I'll distribute. When I'm done, I will take questions from the Township Committee, and then with the indulgence of the mayor, I'll take questions from the members of the public as well. And I would prefer to do this standing, if I may,
Oh,
Mayor.
of course.
And I'll just
That'll make much more
go
sense.
outside. This enclave.
There are some seats for people who are standing, if they want to sit.
And I just gave up. Someone wants to be the town attorney. Yes, there was. Will you excuse my back? So that's hard to see from everywhere in the room, so I'll just read what it says, and we're distributing copies of
Joe?
what is up there.
You want to take the microphone? Does that help?
If at any time you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll know what that means, and I'll try to speak louder. Can you hear me all right?
No.
No? Okay. So, this might be better? Yes. Okay. So the first one, the title of this whole presentation is Alternative Approaches to Municipal Control Over Land Use. And what I've set forth are 4 possibilities, options available to a governing body as to how to approach land use in a particular area of the community. The first is to leave everything the way it is, no change in zoning. The second is to do the opposite of that, and that is undertake a rezoning process. The third is to determine if the area qualifies as an area in need of rehabilitation. And the fourth is to determine if the area qualifies as an area in need of redevelopment. Now, I'll explain the significance of those different designations. And with respect to each of these alternatives, I have a quick summary of what some of the considerations are that need to go into making that choice. So the next page of the slide is captioned "No change in the present zoning." And so what are the considerations if that's the choice? The possible consideration there would be a possible variance application by a property owner to seek a variance from the existing ordinance to provide for an alternative. So I put up what are the criteria that must be satisfied in an application before the Board of Adjustment. This would go before the Board of Adjustment, and it is a trial-type proceeding, and the applicant must establish by the weight of the evidence that the application meets the positive and the negative criteria that are set up in the statute. And to just briefly say those, if the positive criteria are special reasons, which if they are denied, it would create an undue hardship, and or the project carries out a purpose of zoning as defined under the municipal land use law. It must also, it could also satisfy the positive criteria if it is inherently beneficial use. And those are things like hospital, school, child care centers, group homes, wind, solar, or photovoltaic energy facility or structure. So you have to fit the positive criteria. You have to prove that the project will have a positive impact on the community. You also, as an applicant, must establish that the negative criteria are present. That is, that there would not be a substantial detriment to the public good, and it will not substantially, the new project will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance. So those are considerations. If you leave things the way they are, you could get a variance application. If you leave things the way they are, you could get a builder's remedy lawsuit. And by the way, that's an option that permeates through all 4 of these alternatives that I've put up on the screen. So moving to the next option, rezoning the area. What you have to think about if you're going to rezone the area for a new use is the possibility that it could be attacked as spot zoning. Spot zoning is disfavored under the statutes, under the case law. What is spot zoning? It's an effort to focus on a particular area or project or owner or lot to remove the burden of general regulation for that specific property owner. It's focused on not a general public purpose, but a private purpose. It's not spot zoning, on the other hand, if the zoning ordinance is made for the purpose of furthering a comprehensive scheme for the benefit of the community. And that comes out of a case that is cited in very small print there. But I also point out on this page the builder's remedy litigation that could occur if the area is rezoned. So now I'm turning to the concept of a rehabilitation designation. And I'm going to start talking about this in a way backwards. Because why would you go through the process of a rehabilitation designation, or what comes on the next page, a redevelopment designation? That's because once you get over establishing that the area meets the criteria of one or the other, then you go into a different process, which is to adopt what's called a redevelopment plan. Oddly enough, even if it's a rehabilitation area, you adopt what's called a redevelopment plan after you meet the criteria. I'll come back to the criteria in a minute, but once you adopt a redevelopment plan, then there's enormous control and power that the municipality has over what happens there. Now, the process is different with rehabilitation as compared with redevelopment designations, but they both lead to the same outcome if the criteria are met. That is, a redevelopment plan followed then by the most important document of all, a redevelopment agreement with a designated redeveloper. I'll talk about that in more detail as I go on. But let me go back to the topic of criteria, because in order to get to this powerful place that a municipality can get, the process must be carefully followed, and the criteria that are set up specifically in the statute must be met. So what you can't see up there, if you're sitting far from that screen, are the criteria for the designation of an area as an area in need of rehabilitation. And I have listed the 6 that are in the statute, but I'm going to talk about number 6, which is the one that is typically used in declaring an area in need of rehabilitation. In fact, some communities have determined that the entire municipality is an area in need of rehabilitation. That's been done in Newark, in Asbury Park, in Trenton, in Hoboken. Lots of places have done this because the standard is a majority of the water and sewer infrastructure in the delineated area is at least 50 years old and is in need of repair or substantial maintenance. That's a pretty black and white consideration. There are others, but you only have to meet one of these. You don't have to meet all of these. One of these will do it. So it eliminates a lot of controversy, frankly, eliminates a lot of lawsuits, and it gets that task done if you can establish that criteria exists. And I picked that one because I understand that a lot of the water and sewer in this community and in the area that you're interested in may be as old as 80 years old. So it may or it may not fit, but it's up there on the screen for consideration. Now, what is different about declaring an area in need of rehabilitation as distinguished from one in need of redevelopment? There are 2 important differences between the 2. And with rehabilitation, the power of condemnation is not existent. So that's an important consideration, because in some cases, in order to go on with a redevelopment plan, you need to have the ability to assemble properties to make it work. But that's not available in the area in need of rehabilitation designation. And the second thing that's not available are long-term pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, which are really a mechanism to enter into an agreement between the municipality and the redeveloper to fix the taxes for a 30-year period. That's a very favorable transaction, sometimes mutually beneficial to the municipality and the redeveloper if it's properly negotiated. That's not on the table with rehabilitation. What is on the table with rehabilitation is a short-term tax abatement, 5 years, that goes 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So the first year, it's 20% of the taxes that would otherwise be paid, and so on. It's something lesser of an inducement to redevelop. But the rehabilitation designation, if met, leads to the ability to adopt a redevelopment plan, which is, I think of it as a hybrid between a zoning ordinance and a master plan, because it contains both. When you have a plan, the plan fixes the zoning and uses for the area that's been designated. And so it's like a zoning ordinance. But it also sets out vision and goals and establishes a bigger picture of what's desired for that location. And the designation, if met, also allows the municipality then to take control through the process which the municipality has of designating who's going to redevelop the site. The municipality gets to choose that and enter in that party and enter into negotiations of a redevelopment agreement. And once the redevelopment plan is adopted, the normal limitations on governmental power are loosened greatly, and the municipality can negotiate as if it were a private corporation. It's not bound by a lot of the limitations of, I'll give you one example that doesn't apply in this situation, but when you have a redevelopment plan, the municipality that owns municipal property can convey that property to the redeveloper without going through the procedure of the local lands and buildings law, which requires competitive bidding for the land. So that's one example of what can be done. Now, the other thing about a redevelopment agreement that comes at the end of this process is that it's a negotiation, and it is an opportunity for the municipality to share in the benefits that are made available by the municipality going through this effort of creating a different zoning option that typically enhances the value of the property. And so what we recommend when we go through those negotiations is that the municipality sit down with the mindset that they're going to share in the benefit of this, be partners in effect. And how do you do that? You do that by getting the opportunity to look at the pro forma, the projected profit that the expenses that the property owner will incur, and the projected profit, so that there can be a conversation about negotiating community benefits out of that profit. And that could go toward a variety of things that the municipality may be looking for as amenities to come back to the municipality. One example, obviously, is to repair water and sewer infrastructure, not only in the immediate area, which is all you can do when it's a project as of right under the municipal land use law. You cannot require a developer who comes in under a zoning ordinance and meets all the terms of the zoning ordinance. You can't require that party to improve your water and sewer beyond the improvement that's needed to accommodate that project. But in redevelopment, you can. It all comes down to negotiating leverage. So I'm going to quickly turn to the redevelopment determination, which is in the smaller print, because there are more criteria. And I didn't put up all of the criteria in the statute. I took out some that just clearly wouldn't even apply. But you can see, if you have a handout, that the designation requires a determination that the buildings are substandard, unsafe, unsanitary, dilapidated, or obsolescent, possess any characteristics so as to be unwholesome living. I'm reading this quickly, not to get flustered on any of these words. The discontinuance of the use of the buildings previously used for certain uses, In D, areas with buildings or improvements pushed by reason of dilapidation, obsolescence, overcrowding, faulty arrangement or design, lack of ventilation, and the list goes on. Now, the point of this is to make the point that as between finding out what the date is on the manhole cover for the water and sewer line, how old they are, and make an assumption about whether they need to be repaired, this requires a lot of thorough data collection and site inspection and judgment. It's more subjective than the other criteria I put up. So therefore, it's more likely to be challenged. It's more likely to lead to extended delays and litigation costs and expenses, and that's not good for anybody but the attorneys, and it's not good for the community if you want to get on to redeveloping the community. So let me talk then about when you go through the redevelopment process, just to make the point, you could do condemnation, but you have an option of going through redevelopment with a non-condemnation designation. But you could also provide for those long-term pilots if you choose this option. Again, this option leads you to the preparation of a redevelopment plan, as I mentioned earlier, and it leads to the negotiation of a redevelopment agreement. So let me take a minute to talk about the process of going these two different ways, because they're different. The process for rehabilitation is very streamlined. It calls for the governing body to ask that a report be prepared to identify the age of the infrastructure, if that's the choice that's being made, and the condition of the infrastructure, which is something that is pretty straightforward. The municipality then drafts a proposed resolution to declare the area in need of rehabilitation and sends that resolution to the planning board for its review and comment. And the planning board has 45 days from the time it gets that draft resolution to give its comment. The planning board can act sooner, and then the municipality can act sooner. The planning board's comments are advisory. The planning board does not make the determination, but submits comments for the consideration of the township committee. The township committee can accept, modify, or reject them and just move forward, or just change its mind. But the final decision is always with the elected officials, the members of the governing body. How is that different from redevelopment determination? With a redevelopment determination, the process begins a little differently. The township committee would adopt a resolution saying to the planning board, take a look at this area and define it. Define an area. And ask the planning board to conduct a study to determine whether that area meets one or more of the criteria to be declared an area in need of redevelopment. Typically, the next step is for the planning board to hire a planning consultant and maybe some other professionals as well to look into the condition of the buildings and the arrangement of the site and all the issues that would go into determining whether the area meets the criteria. The study then is submitted to the planning board, and then the planning board sends out a notice at least 10 days in advance of the meeting to the people within the designated area, not people within 40 feet, but people within that designated area, owners. And then there's a public hearing, and there is a trial type hearing. The consultant who prepared the report is sworn, there's testimony provided, there's cross-examination. If there's a dispute, there can be evidence brought in with other competing consultants to challenge the determination of the report. And it goes back and forth. I've been involved in cases where it's gone on for a couple of hours or a couple of months, or in one case, a couple of years it went on. So that then, the planning board gets done with all that hard work, but the planning board does not make the decision. The planning board makes a recommendation to the township committee, so whether or not the area meets the criteria. And some areas do, some part maybe they can say some of it does, some of it doesn't. The final decision is with the governing body to determine whether the area meets the criteria. And if they decide they want to go forward, then what they do is introduce an ordinance, and that was going on tonight with several other ordinances, the same process, introduced, and then at a subsequent meeting, a public hearing is held, and then a vote taken. And then, if that is adopted, that determination is done, then the next step is undertaking the process of preparing a plan, the redevelopment plan. And the redevelopment plan, as I mentioned, includes the uses, the zoning, and the vision of a broader, goal-oriented vision of what's involved there. We work on some of these in a variety of communities. They provide, in some cases, that the redeveloper obviously puts in all of the infrastructure and pays for perhaps donations to an open space fund, also may provide park space at the area or someplace else, provide, in a case we've worked on in Hoboken where flooding is an issue, the redeveloper was encouraged to provide very much enhanced underground storm retention facilities to retain the rainwater and let it out when the sun comes out. And those are the kinds of things you would say in a plan. The ability to get those things depends upon negotiating carefully and effectively the redevelopment agreement. You can't sit down with the redeveloper and negotiate until you have the plan. The cases are clear that the plan is what triggers the power to negotiate with the redeveloper. And once that happens, it's a process of identifying a redeveloper. Typically, what municipalities do is they enter into a conditional designation of the redeveloper for a period of 90 days, 120 days, maybe longer, during which time the municipality agrees they won't negotiate with anybody else, and the parties agree that they will spend time negotiating in good faith a redevelopment agreement that complies with the plan. And the agreement also provides, it's called an interim cost, because it provides a funding mechanism from the conditionally designated redeveloper to the municipality to pay for all of the expenses the municipality will incur in negotiating the agreement. Engineering expenses, financial analysis, looking at that pro forma that I talk about, doing architectural reviews, whatever it might be, is funded through that mechanism. And if the parties can agree, after a period of negotiation, to the redevelopment agreement, that agreement fixes what is going to be built. That is something that cannot be done under the normal zoning ordinance. It can't be done under the municipal land use law, but with a redevelopment agreement, you can determine very minute details of the project. And the main documents, parts of the project, of the agreement, I always say, Exhibit A, which is a description, a very specific description of the project. What's it going to be? How many units? What's the size? What's the architectural appearance of it? What's the landscape? Everything in that. Exhibit A. And Exhibit B is the project schedule. When is it going to happen? Dates, so that you can keep track. And that's the end result. That is what I just described is the maximum municipal control over land use. If you get to that point, you can skip over to this slide to give a visual of what I've been talking about. On this horizontal line of lease control on the left side and most on the right, If you have no zoning change, that's the least amount of municipal control over a project, over land. If you go to the rezoning, you have something more than nothing. If you go all the way over to the redevelopment or the rehabilitation designation, and you go through all those steps properly, you have maximum control of what's going to be there, with the overriding caveat about builder's remedy, which is always a threat. So I summarized all of this on the prior slide to kind of put it in a matrix so you can, just refresh what I tried to talk about. I'm sure there will be questions, but with the first line of active township role, that you get that with rehabilitation and non-condemnation redevelopment or condemnation. That's what process I've been describing, where the township takes a very active, proactive role and ends up with that agreement. If you choose a no zoning change and you choose to rezone, then you're passive, because even if you rezone, you're just setting the parameters of what can be built in a particular area, but you don't have any control of when it's going to be done, and you don't have any control of what it's going to look like, and you don't have any control over trying to extract. Negotiate would be a better word than extract, but negotiate benefits back to the municipality from the transaction. And then going down the list, you can see, I won't go through all of this, but it just summarizes the key features of all of these. I'm going to go backwards and talk about leaving the current zoning in place, because I thought after putting all this together, and it's a little out of order, well, what is the current zoning? And so there's a page that tells you the current zoning of the areas that we're all here to talk about. And the permitted principal uses are retail, sales, and services, food stores limited to 15,000 square feet, other retail activities limited to 5,000 square feet, offices, financial institutions, apartments over retail, and a maximum building height of 2 stories. There are conditional uses for restaurants, fast food restaurants, retail food establishments, eating and drinking places. That must be at least 125 feet from the nearest residential lot, and no drive-throughs. So that's what's out there right now. If somebody came in with an application to do that, they can get approval as of right. They don't need a variance. They'll go to the planning board for site plan approval, and
They can do the birth control.
that's the least.
No, that seems like the most
Why
control.
don't we
I
let him,
agree.
wait a minute,
Can I suggest that I take questions from the concept committee first, then I'll go with the mayor's indulgence.
Well, what I was going to suggest is you finish your presentation, then he'll take questions.
Yes, and actually, saying no drive-throughs is the last thing I was going to
There
say.
you go.
So I'll take questions from the mayor and
So
council.
just generally, what would be the time frame, if you can just give a general time frame for, I guess, doing no change in present zoning would be no time frame whatsoever.
Right.
It is as it is, right?
Yeah.
But doing either a rehabilitation determination or an area or a redevelopment determination. What's
Well,
generally the time
okay,
frame
sure,
for that?
that's an excellent question. If it's an area in need of rehabilitation, the first step is to do that report I talked about to document the facts. That I can't predict how long it would take, but I wouldn't think it would take more than a few weeks to get all those facts together, submitted to the township committee, sent over to the planning board. They would have 45 days. So maybe now we're in 2.5 months, depending on meeting dates and all that sort of thing. It comes back to the governing body. The governing body simply adopts the resolution, so probably 3 to 4 months that process could be done. the redevelopment plan is a different story. But the area in need of redevelopment is a longer process, because that means that you have to decide as a township committee to do the delineation area that you want studied, send it to the planning board, they have to engage the consultant, maybe they have the consultant. Consultant has to go out and collect all the evidence and data, prepare a report, take 1 million photographs, check with, all the township departments about issues concerning the structures and so on, if there are any. That takes several months to do that, I would think. I'm not speaking for the planner, but my guess that I've seen. And then the process is a public hearing before the planning board, 10 days notice. Got to be very carefully done, the notices. And then you don't know how long those hearings will go. Those hearings could be over in a night, or they could continue for several hearings. And when that happens, it's always mixing those hearings in with the other business of the planning board, finding dates that work. That could be several months. Then let's say that process goes relatively quickly. There's not a lot of hearings, maybe 2. Then there has to be a vote of the planning board, a recommendation back here, and then you have to consider adopting an ordinance, which is a process that takes about a month. And so I'd probably describe at a minimum 6-7 months at a very, very minimum period of time, I would think.
And the redevelopment plan, approximately how long does that take?
The redevelopment plan depends on the amount of involvement. In some that we've been working on, Hoboken, there's a great deal of community involvement in the preparation of meeting stakeholder groups, focus groups, meeting with the property owners separately, and then pulling it all together in a document, making sure that the wish list of the municipality is in there in terms of what you would like in terms of amenities for the municipality. So that process takes months, at least. That process takes at least months. And the adoption of that plan is by way of an ordinance again, and public hearing on the ordinance when it's adopted. Many times, the process of preparing a redevelopment plan includes doing a financial feasibility study to test whether the plan that is proposed will be implementable. Is it a plan that is not calling for 3 single-family homes, to make a ridiculous example, which would not be financially feasible, and could easily be overturned by a challenger. But if it is a plan that is reasonably possible to be implemented with market conditions that exist, that you can test with a financial consultant to look at that, then it's difficult for a challenger to overturn a redevelopment plan, because a plan is a discretionary document. The court doesn't have to agree with what you want, but that's what the community wants. Unless they've been unreasonable and arbitrary, that's fine. It's much more likely that a redevelopment determination will be successfully challenged, because picking apart those criteria and the facts that go into it consumes a lot of litigation, time-consuming, costly litigation. It's easier to win at that step in challenging the determination than it is for a challenger to win, to challenge the plan.
Right, okay, so it is quite cumbersome. So the rehabilitation and the redevelopment both lead eventually to a plan. And we would like that plan in our best interest to negotiate with Silverman, who already owns this property. So we're hoping to get what's best for the community.
I don't know anything about the Silverman transaction. I'm
Right.
not here to speak
Right,
specifically
but somebody
about it.
already owned it. It's not like going
Yeah.
out and looking for a developer at this
No,
point.
and it's
So
right.
we're looking for the best power to negotiate.
Yes,
And the least expensive with least amount of court time and legal fees. So it seems to me the rehabilitation route might get us there in a better way. Does that sound reasonable?
It does, if it meets the criteria, and if that's where you want to go.
So following up with that, if we wanted to right now, we could commission a report on the gas station's sewers. And if the sewers are over 50 years old and in need of rehabilitation, we can then prepare a resolution declaring it in need of rehabilitation and send it to the planning board, correct?
Almost. You wouldn't look at just the gas station, you'd do the whole area, the whole area, and you would prepare a draft resolution and ask the planning board to come in on the draft resolution, which would have attached to it the report, yes,
Okay, because we just need one of these criteria for rehabilitation, correct?
yes.
Okay, and in that case, for example, in this property, if there happen to be plans online of some kind of projected plan, that doesn't go forward right now while we're doing this, is that correct? Is there any kind of stay?
There's not a stay. It doesn't go forward unless there is an application for a variance.
There's no application.
You know, no, it doesn't go forward.
And at any point, we're subject, well, we're vulnerable to any kind of builder's remedy in any of these steps.
Yes, every one of the steps has that same risk.
Any other questions before we open it up to the
I have one other question, Joe. Sorry. When you talked about a redevelopment, the person who does the redevelopment doesn't have to be the current owner of the property, does it?
Not if you have condemnation power, but if you don't have condemnation power, you're pretty much locked into the property owner or not anything happening.
And we have condemnation power only in the last one, in the redevelopment?
In the redevelopment designation, when you choose to say it's condemned, you have to pick that choice when you send it to the planning board.
So we're basically buying that property?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
that, typically the way that it's done, where there's condemnation, is a redeveloper who's not the property owner, enters into the redevelopment agreement and agrees to attempt to buy the property in a voluntary transaction. And if after a period of time that can't be achieved, then the redevelopment agreement would provide that the redeveloper would send a condemnation notice to the municipality, which would begin the condemnation process with the understanding that the redeveloper would pay for all the cost of that. It's not easy to find a redeveloper to come in and take on that kind of an uncertain risk these days.
do you know any municipalities that's happened lately?
Yeah, well, not lately, but we worked on projects like that in Perth Amboy and with mixed success. Some of them went forward and are built and up, and some of them are languishing.
Okay, thank you.
So that scenario, does that work considering that this property has already been purchased by a builder versus it's just open property?
Well, the fact that it's owned by one party just means that the sites have all been assembled.
Okay,
It doesn't interfere with your governmental public interest power.
and the condemnation process?
Yeah, well, in the condemnation process, it's different because you don't have 5 or 6 condemnation cases, you have one. But that, you know, I cautioned you about thinking that that's an easy way to go. That's not an easy way to go. It's a way to go, but it's fraught with uncertainties because in condemnation you must pay the fair market value of the property. And sometimes you don't know what that is until you get to a trial and the jury decides. And jurors are hostile to condemnation for redevelopment projects, and some of the awards that come in have been double the appraised value. So that's a problem. That is what kind of colors this idea that you can get another redeveloper to come in and then. So it's out there, And in the proper case, it is appropriate, but it is not an easy process.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, so should we open it up to the public? Let's try to figure out how to make this
Yes.
somewhat quarterly.
Well, I chaired the state planning commission. I had hearings and
Okay.
I used to say I'm gonna go like this. This is what I used to do. How many people want to speak, just to get a sense of how many?
questions?
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
just questions.
yeah, just to get a sense, not bound by this, you can change your mind, but now we know roughly 5 minutes or 3 minutes times this number of hands.
Well, these are the questions to you.
Yes, fine.
Okay, start with that.
Okay, so why don't we start over there, because that's the area I've been, mostly, this area's had my back. So, yes.
I just have one quick question.
Could you stand up so everybody can hear you?
Yes, just one quick question. How soon can the demolition be done?
Well, the demolition, the question was how soon should the demolition begin? Well, the demolition could not begin, the demolition could begin tomorrow if the developer, if the property owner wants to demolish the property, right? Right, if he goes through the proper process. But if you're talking about, in order to build something new, we have to go through this process we talked about and negotiate a redevelopment agreement. That's ambitiously a year plus.
Okay, when you're going to ask questions, could you please identify yourself for the record?
Right.
Thank
So let's
you.
go over here. Yes. Could you stand up so everybody can hear you?
Carrie Strasberg, I'm right here.
No,
Carrie Strasberg under the, under what circumstances would a developer advertise online a 4-story building when the current zoning is only 2 stories? Unless they thought that they would be able to get variances for that.
Can we limit the questions to his presentation? Because you're asking him to
Well, no,
speculate.
I'm
on
not
what-
zoning. Zoning is 2 stories.
Right,
Well,
but-
I can answer that
So
quickly. I have no idea. I wouldn't do that. I don't have any idea what those are.
A copy.
Yes, yes, over there.
Carolyn Grindell. You were saying that the most power, most control for the township is in a redevelopment or a rehabilitation. It would seem to me the most control is in refusing to rezone and keeping it 2 stories, because then you actually have the ultimate power of having the zoning that you want. Why do you characterize it the other way?
Well, because the possibility of a variance occurs, and if a variance is granted.
What does that mean, the possibility of a variance occurs? Can you explain that?
Well, that was my second slide, to say that if you keep, my first slide, if you keep the zoning, the property owner can decide to seek a variance.
And they could be refused.
It could be refused, but then there could be a lawsuit about whether that has been properly refused. So that's, there's no control, because the control is lost to the court.
Because then they have to sue to get you to change the zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, I'm gonna go to this side of the room now. Yes, in the back. Yes, sir.
Geraldine Hageman, Pine Terrace West. Geraldine Hageman, Pine Terrace West. What's a builder's remedy that's listed in each board?
A builder's remedy is the terminology that has been developed by the courts in the context of affordable housing. The courts, in the famous Mount Laurel decision, that some of you may know about, many years ago declared that there's a constitutional obligation that every region, every municipality has an obligation under the Constitution to provide an opportunity for affordable housing. And so that is a challenge to zoning ordinances that don't permit certain type of uses that are more affordable. And so there's litigation going on right now about what all this means. This is a 5-hour conversation, but to boil it down, builder's remedy happens when a builder files a lawsuit and proves to the court that the municipality is out of compliance with its constitutional obligation. And so the courts have coined this idea that a builder who takes it upon itself to redeem a constitutional obligation that has not been met is entitled to a remedy, a reward for doing that. And that typically turns out to be enhanced density for the property that maybe it's zoned like it is here, but then that zoning is invalidated entirely. A court of mediator is appointed to make the determinations as to what should be there instead. The municipality loses control in that process, and the builder gets a remedy of building a great deal more market rate units to support 10 to 20% of them being affordable units. So my comment on a builder's remedy is that's exactly what it is. It's a remedy for builders. It's not a remedy for people who need affordable housing. Why? Because they usually get only 10 or 20% of the units anyway, and you get all these units, 10 or 20% are affordable. It's a misnomer, I think.
So can you just explain to what Carolyn said, how that differs from them going to court for the variance?
Well, the standard is different, right? If it's a builder's remedy, you go into the court and you say to the judge, this municipality has not followed its constitutional obligation. If it's a variance application that has been denied, then you're walking into a court and saying to the judge something entirely different. They arbitrarily denied me my variance. I'm entitled to a variance based on the evidence I put in the record. And that's why I say that goes to the court to make that decision in both those cases. But the proofs are entirely different.
Isn't it easier to win on a variance than on a builder's remedy?
Well, I'm taking questions in order.
Sorry.
I think back to that gentleman right there.
Sandy Kimmel. So the question in the rehabilitation determination, the committee decides the parameters of the use of the property, or the use of, in the plan.
Yeah.
Can that define the density and things like the height of the building?
Yeah, the question is excellent. And the question is, when there's a redevelopment plan after the rehabilitation or the redevelopment, can the plan define the density and the height? Absolutely. That's what the plan would do.
And is that subject to a builder's remedy?
Yes, it could be. The builder's remedy,
Is it always there?
the builder's remedy is over there, always there, because the builder's remedy is like a big umbrella, because it's a constitutional principle that wipes everything off the table if it happens.
But am I correct to say that the plan, if it defines those goals, provides the best opportunity to defeat a builder's remedy, so long as it's done in a reasonable way?
Well, it would depend on whether the builder might be able to prove that the municipality, despite that, is out of compliance on a municipal-wide basis. You have to be in compliance on a municipal-wide basis, not just on that area. I'm going over here now. This side of the room was looking at me and had no questions. Yes, right there.
I'm Greg Blackburn, 11 Inwood Road, 2 blocks south. I'm curious which scenario wouldn't generate legal action by the developer.
You have to ask the developer that.
You're an attorney.
Yeah, I think it depends upon,
All of them would then.
I think all of them are vulnerable to that, and so the question is, where are you in the strongest position to withstand it? And so if I could just talk about the rehabilitation redevelopment, I think it's an easier case for the municipality to win if you have the proof that the water and sewer is over 50 years old and is in need of repair. Case closed on that challenge. If you go the redevelopment route, I can tell you that the briefs and the debates over whether the area meets those criteria goes on forever. And that is where the challenger could be most successful. So, more hands are coming up.
Dave Taj from 99 Oakview. A question on the redevelopment plan you talked about. So if this was designated either way to where the town comes up with their own plan. What's the next challenge then by the builder or the owner of the property?
If
So the town says
Yeah,
2 stories,
Yeah,
1
town-
unit, whatever it says.
yeah, well, if a redevelopment plan is adopted, the question is, what's the challenge, what's the argument that could be brought? I hesitate to present arguments to prospective litigators against the township, but obviously, as I was saying, if a plan is not financially implementable, if it proposes something that is not going to provide a reasonable rate of return on the investment, that's a vulnerable plan. And that's why what we've done in some of our plans is had financial analysis done by the experts to tell us what's the rate of return that's appropriate here, and how can we make sure that the size and density is no greater than that. That's what I've worked on those kinds of things. I think this
Yes,
lady.
hi. Emily Babolia on Hobart Avenue, right across the street from this development. My question isn't about the payment in lieu of taxes. The reduced tax rates for years or non-payment of taxes, which parts of our township do not receive money? Because they will be receiving township services as well as schools.
Okay, so this is the topic of pilots. Pilots is a big topic. And the conversation about pilots goes like this, that you have a certain amount of tax revenue that's coming from a particular area now, right? Let's say, just for an example, it's $250,000 a year from all of the existing uses. If there's a new development and it's assessed at the normal rates of taxes, it may produce $5 million a year, right? I'm just picking numbers. It may produce a revenue stream of $5 million a year at normal rates. With a pilot, you negotiate a different number that's less than the number, typically less than the number that otherwise would be paid, they call it otherwise applicable taxes, but higher than what's coming in now. And you have the ability as the municipality to negotiate how close to that normal tax revenue it would be. Now, your question was, what about the schools? That is a hot topic, because when there's a pilot, that money is divided up differently than the normal tax money. And how's it divided up? 5% of the payment of the pilot goes to the county, and 95% of the payment goes to the municipality. The school does not get any direct payment out of the pilot. Now, the question then is, everybody thinks the schools are losing money. No, they're not losing money in this equation. What happens is the schools get all the money that the voters approve in the budget when they approve the budget. That's unchanged. The school will get every penny.
Even if the enrollment increases based
Well,
on
if
the
the enrollment,
occupation
if
of
the
these.
enrollment, even if the enrollment increases, that would be reflected in the school budget, right?
Right, but where's the money coming
Well,
from for the school budget?
From the taxpayer. So it's not coming from the property owner who's got the pilot, right?
So they don't pay the extra tax.
They don't pay the extra taxes. They're paying a lot more than the municipality was getting today, but they don't pay that. Who pays it? It gets spread among everybody else.
But wait a minute, just, the pilot is something that is available under the redevelopment, it's not available under rehabilitation, and just because it's available doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be implemented. It's just for informational that it's available under redevelopment, but not available under rehabilitation.
I thought it was available for 5 years under
Yeah,
rehabilitation.
it's 5 years under rehab.
So it is
Right, it's not
available.
considered a pilot, right, but it's, go ahead.
But it's similar
No,
for 5 years.
No, the 5 year is not a payment in lieu of tax. The 5 year is a fixed amount. It goes 20% of the assessment up to 40, 80, 100, and it's done. Then from that point on, it goes as if it were not favored in any way, and at no point does the school lose money in that one. I mean, that tax payment is distributed the way your taxes are distributed. But, yes.
Yes, thank you. Phoebe Shear, 101 Oakview Terrace. Most of us who are here about this project are concerned about the two-story limit. That is the thing that we're concerned about. We thought, or many of us thought, that the way that was going to be resolved in favor of the developer to build this 3- and 4-story building was through something called an overlay of the master plan, or a change in the master plan. Now, you didn't mention either of those two options. Are they in somewhere in these 4 options, or couldn't that still happen, and shouldn't we still be concerned about that if we oppose this change?
Yeah, the question is, could there be an overlay zone? An overlay zone would be part of rezoning, right?
So they would go before the zoning board of adjustment and ask for that?
No. An overlay comes by way of amending the zoning ordinance, and that's only done here.
Right.
Amending the zoning ordinance. It's a decision of the governing body to amend the zoning ordinance to provide more enhanced zoning. I haven't heard that that's a
And what about the township plan is being redrawn very soon? What about just a change in the township plan? That's another way it can be achieved, correct?
No, the master plan is a goal document. It must be reflected in the zoning ordinance, which is only in control of the governing body, the elected officials. So the overlay zoning idea would have to be part of amending the zoning ordinance. That's on my screen under the topic of rezoning. That's a rezoning option. Gentleman back here.
Peter Vincent from Taylor Road South. Just want to mention one thing about the builder's remedy lawsuits, which we all hear about. And that is across all of the townships in New Jersey today, there is not a single one of these cases that's active. It is a tool used by developers to threaten litigation. And it usually goes into a conference, and they sort this out because they don't want to go to court with that as well. So keep that in mind. You often hear that phrase, and oftentimes in a dynamic like this where a citizenry is maybe have an opposing view to the township committee, you'll hear that floated a lot, but I think it's a Trojan horse. I do have one question for you about...
I have to respond because I've been involved in builders' remedy cases where they are active and they do go to the court.
This is the latest information I got from the Philadelphia Inquirer that has researched all cases in New Jersey today. There is not a single case right now in court.
Right now, right today is true because we're waiting for a decision from a judge in Middlesex.
No, I understand. I'm just saying it's floated like this could come down on our heads tomorrow, and
just so there's
developers don't
full
want this
disclosure. This case is going on. The judge took all of the testimony. It took months. She's taking months to write her opinion. It's been long overdue. Nobody knows what that's going to exactly say, but it is expected that it is going to create a floodgate of litigation and opportunity. That's what's expected.
But let me ask, my main question that I'd like to ask you. If you have and correct me if I'm wrong on something I say here, please, but if you have a dynamic where you have a citizenry, a large chunk of the citizenry that is opposed to a development project like the Silverman Lofts project, is it not in the citizens' against their best interest if the township committee were to grant or recommend a rehabilitation determination, because it seems as though that fast tracks the project? You described it as that they can act like a private entity, and that a project like this could suddenly move ahead at a much quicker pace without the normal review processes if we stuck with our traditional zoning and hearing process.
I'm glad you asked that question because I want to clarify if I gave that impression that if the designation is made, then the project can go forward. No. The designation is the first step. nothing can happen after the designation until there's a plan. The plan would be developed with community input and would reflect the density, the height, those issues in the plan. The plan is done. Now, can the developer go ahead and build on the basis of the plan alone? No. There's another step, and that is that the municipality must designate the redeveloper before the redeveloper can go to the planning board. Designate the redeveloper, declare that redeveloper as the redeveloper, enter into the redevelopment agreement, then the project proceeds after those 3 steps.
But those steps could occur very quickly, particularly since we have a plan in place from the Silverman Group as to what they want to build.
Well, what the private entity wants is not what dictates what the municipality must give. That is a premise here, that because the developer wants something, the public entity is not required to respond and maximize the profit of the private party to the detriment of the municipality. Now, where does that occur in this equation? This is where the financial analysis comes in. What makes financial sense? What creates a huge benefit to the property owner? And what creates a negative for the property owner? Neither of those things should happen. There should be a plan that's fair to both. And that's where I urge the involvement of financial analysis as the plan is being adopted, to test the plan against the rate of return. Didn't I go on you? No. Okay.
Constantine Shark, 25 Oak Hill Road. Financial plan. So my question to that is obviously rate of return for the builder, it'll be appropriate, whatever it is. What's the ability for the public to reflect more of intangible things for us? So, traffic, schools, environment, and how is that actually calculated in the plan? So can we sort of say, well, to us, we think that this will have a negative return of the livability index or whatever. What are the ways for the public to sort of do a similar analysis?
Well, the question is, how does the public get its concerns into this mix? Traffic is always the issue in any of these. And so that, in my experience, that topic comes to the table as the plan is being developed. And the plan may address that in a robust way by getting some traffic analysis before the plan is done. Or it could provide that before the project can go before the planning board, there has to be a suitable traffic analysis. There's lots of flexibility. That's the point I'm trying to make. There's a lot of flexibility. There is very little flexibility when a developer comes in as a matter of right under existing zoning, or comes in and gets a variance in terms of traffic. There's some, but it's limited.
So the variance system does not have ability to have similar studies done?
Yes, it does, but it's not as robust as it happens when you're sitting across the negotiating table to negotiate a redevelopment agreement where you have leverage. You don't have as much leverage in the process of planning board approval or the like. Yes, sir.
Como 73 Highland Avenue. So from what I heard from you, I think the township committee really is the final decision maker. So my question for you, also for the committee, is how much you want to hear or listen from the public input. So is that a big deal to you, or it's just formality which you probably simply ignore it? By the way, before you answer, I made this for the sign to the developer. I think they're lucky they're not here. What I said here, I think the developer, they're here for the money. It's so clear. And we as a community, we're here for the benefits of the community. We're here for our kids. We're going to be united. We're going to fight very hard. Then I would appreciate our mayor can answer the question about the importance of public input.
I put myself as Exhibit A, that the municipality wants to hear from you because they've asked me to do all this. Come here and address you and answer your questions and be very forthright about the whole process. I'm Exhibit A. Yes, sir. Yeah.
When you discuss, I'm sorry, Barry from 45 Hilltop Place. When you discuss this financial analysis, does that automatically include the burden on the school budget? So for example, if the difference between a 2-level building and a 3-level building with 50 units, and that has a certain burden on the school budget, is that a part of that negotiation or that discussion?
It can be, yes. Yes, the negotiation can include anything and everything. And it's a matter of leverage. What, like any transaction, with any negotiation, who has, is there a leverage on both sides of the table? My view is that in the redevelopment conversation, negotiation, if Millburn Short Hills doesn't have a lot of leverage going into a discussion like that, I don't know what municipality does. There's a lot of benefit ultimately to the developer at the end of the process that only comes through this redevelopment process if it agrees to the terms. Yes, sir.
I don't understand who the negotiator is for us. Is it the group builds up with point of view and positions, planning board and what have you, and who, do we have a general standing there litigating this whole thing if it comes to that?
Okay, the question is, who's the negotiator?
We are.
Yeah. The governing body is the redevelopment entity in this context. So the governing body would decide how the negotiations would go forward, would direct them. I'm involved in different places where it's done different ways. Sometimes the elected officials want to be at the table. Sometimes they don't until the final deal is almost close. There's lots of different ways to negotiate it, but it's important to have a plan to negotiate it and to lay out a strategy to negotiate it, and that's way down the road from tonight.
Yeah, and once again, the plan is built from the ground up by these folks and the planning board.
Yes, the plan can, to get deeper into the weeds, there's two ways that a plan can be prepared under the law. The governing body can ask the planning board to prepare the plan. Or the governing body can take control over that, prepare the plan, and submit it to the planning board for its review and comment. That's the way it is almost universally done. The governing body doing the plan, sending it to the planning board, asking for comment. And that sets a clock on how long it's going to take, because the planning board then has this 45-day period to respond. If the plan is referred, the project to the planning board, it could take a couple of years. And if you want it done sooner, the way I've always seen it done is the governing body.
I would just have one reservation. You've got a planning board who's ever done this before in this kind of scale. I don't know whether they do it against a developer whose life's blood is doing this. Is that like an unfair battle?
We have a plan.
Pardon me?
We wouldn't do it ourselves, we have a plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the planner the one that goes in and fights the fight, or? I have a hard understanding the responsibility line, personnel responsibility.
Yeah, well, when we're now we're talking about how do we negotiate the redevelopment agreement, which is
No,
way
I think
down the
he's
road.
talking about the plan itself, right?
Plan?
You're
You're talking about the plan?
No, I'm talking about the accountability going up to, somebody sits down with Silverman in this case. And this is an iterative process over, I would guess, over a lot of detail. School numbers being one of them, traffic being another. And all these things come together, our planning consultant is experienced in this. Is he a lawyer?
No, he's a planner.
He's a planner. And we know who that individual is? I guess that's not important. So he takes all the feedback, he takes all the feedback from everyone. And over some period of time, he negotiates the plan that you all.
The plan is not negotiated.
I thought this was all a negotiation.
Not the plan. The redevelopment agreement is the negotiation. The plan is adopted by the governing body. Not in the, I want to clarify that confused. The plan is a government document.
And the plan is helped by the plan.
And
Because
plans.
these folks in all.
Oh, yeah, no, of course. No, I don't mean the governing body sits down and writes the plan. They engage the consultants, sometimes a variety of consultants. Planner usually leading the way, but the adoption of the plan is a governmental decision. It's not a negotiation. After the plan is adopted, then there's a negotiation on the agreement. That's the next step. Yes, sir.
Gary Butter, Baltusrol Way. First, thank you very much. This has been a very illuminating presentation. I really appreciate it. I have a two-part question. The first, I think I understand you correctly, that's within the Township Board's discretion about whether they even want to consider redevelopment or rehabilitation plan. So if they don't ask the planning board, then it ends right there, other than a builder's lawsuit. Is that correct?
Well, if the planning, if the governing body chooses not to do anything, then the current zoning remains, and maybe there's a variance application.
Or a builder's suit. But the second part is, I think you indicated earlier that basically the town's greatest leverage is in deciding whether to go the route of a redevelopment plan or a rehabilitation plan. And that once that's decided, that there's less variability of what the township can do. So my question is that as part of the agreement or the decision of the township to go forward with redevelopment or rehabilitation, can they put in some restrictions way short of an actual plan or agreement, such as limiting to 2 stories, limiting to 7 apartments?
That comes, that detail does not happen until after the designation is formally made. You can't get into, you could say that the statutory scheme has blinders on it, but it does. It says you make an objective decision here. Does this area need to be redeveloped or rehabilitated or not? You're not supposed to be thinking about what it is you're going to put there, because that then subjects the outcome there to the challenge that it's been predetermined. You rubber stamp the designation to get to the plan, and we don't want that to be.
Right, so that also means that, so let's say this township board that's now in power agrees to rehabilitation or whichever, because they know that they are, when it comes down to the plan, that they are going to have requirements such as 2 stories or a limit on apartments. But then the bums get voted out, and no offense, and then the town is kind of at the township people are at the mercy of a board that maybe had a certain view of what would happen. But now they...
I'm not going to make any comment about election outcome.
If you could just go back for a second about the rehabilitation determination. Deborah Nevis, by the way, 65 Millwood Road.
If you could stand up, everybody.
Sure, sure. I had a question about the process for the rehabilitation determination. At what points are public hearings held during this process? I think that that's an important thing that we want to be aware of, because I think we want to weigh in as much as possible. So if you could just kind of delineate at what points the
Yes.
public hearings would occur, that would be
I would.
appreciated.
So we're talking about rehabilitation designation, not redevelopment. The question is, when do the public hearings come in? The statute doesn't require public hearings, but this is what happens. You have the practice of this governing body to hear from the public before resolutions are adopted. I saw that happen tonight. So there's a public hearing before the resolution goes to the planning board. When it goes to the planning board, it's going to be the choice of the planning board as to what to do. I have not seen the planning board refuse to take public comment on a matter of significant public interest. The planning board then makes its recommendation back to the governing body, and the governing body has to do another resolution, and there will be another opportunity at that time to be heard before that resolution is adopted. So there's at least 2, probably 3 public hearings that I would anticipate.
And Joe, as a follow-up to her question, if the township committee wanted to have other venues for hearing public opinion, what other options are there? Could we have focus groups?
Absolutely, there's unlimited options. There could be multiple public hearings before going that route. On the question of whether the area is to be declared in need of rehabilitation. Then the other point I want to make is if that decision is made and it's done, then in developing the plan, that's where the action is, right? That's where all of your worries will be manifested in that plan. Those are the opportunities that you want to have input on the plan. More so, I think, than the designation. Yes, sir.
Steve Misolo, 292 Table Road South. What is the possibility of a township acquiring the property and making a commuter parking lot? It's short of the train station. We have enough parking spaces.
I think everybody heard the question. What about acquiring the property, turning into a commuter parking lot? The power is there. It's a question of the expense, because the property would have to be valued at the fair market value. I don't know what it is. It might be an expensive parking lot. It might be more expensive than what happens to the schools. I'm going to go over here.
I'm sorry. I just feel like there is a slight, Sergio Arista, 93 Pine Street. I'm a new resident here. So I feel like there is a slight disconnect between what you just explained and what we here would like to know. Because what you gave us are options of what would, if I understand it correctly, options of how would we build something where nothing was built before. Like how would you build like a 4-story building in a zone which is for 2-story building only? Like you have 4 options for that. Now, as far as I understand, significant amount of people here actually do not want something to be built where something is built. Like they don't want the 3-story building, they don't want a 4-story building. So because of that, like all the qualifications like redevelopment, rehabilitation, pilots, no pilots, in my view, they're not that important to us. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like they're not too important for us because we honestly, I'm not concerned about like how do we approach a 4-story building here? How do we make a 4-story building happen? We're actually more concerned on how we don't make it 4-story.
Right.
4-story. But that's the fact. I have a question to the committee because. I appreciate it. Question to the committee I have, again, I'm new in the fact, so sorry for asking, maybe everybody knows the answer. My question too is, what is your, because again, from what I heard, you would be, obviously you would be the main actor there. So what is your opinion on the whole situation? What do you see as an ideal situation? Like, what would you like to happen to that lot, right, to that land? What would you want to see there? This is the question I would like to ask.
Well, let me first answer the question that you addressed to me, which is the sort of question.
It's more an observation than a question.
Yeah, but the question was, how can we stop it?
Yeah,
right?
it's
That's
pretty
how
much
we stop
what
it,
it is.
right? This is the United States of America. People have property rights. This property owner has property rights. You have limited power and control over those property rights. You can acquire them by paying the fair market value and turning it into a park or parking lot or whatever. But if you simply say, leave it the way it is, then that's where I have the variance application.
No.
You cannot control that.
No, but that's the kind part of the question. The variance can only happen if the committee approves the variance, right?
No, that's not the case. I want to discuss the variance. The variance application does not go to this body. That application goes to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And why is it called the Zoning Board of Adjustment? Because its sole function is to adjust and change the ordinance. And that's a different body. It's not any of these people are on it. And it is a body that gets applications and must act like in a judicial way, in hearing evidence and making decisions based upon the evidence in the record. I was talking about what the criteria are, and many times zoning boards deny variance. That's not the end of the story, because what happens next? A lawsuit. I'm not talking about a builder's remedy lawsuit right now. I'm talking about a lawsuit to challenge the denial by the Board of Adjustment of the variance. And courts often overturn those denials. Because, or sometimes they don't. I don't know anything about the tech, but that's, so in the interest of full disclosure, you should know that that's a possibility that you can't.
Right, thanks for that. But sorry, I just would like to have if possible.
Not right now. We're in the middle of something else right now where people are asking Mr. Marzini questions about his presentation. And that's what we're doing at the moment.
Erica Moffitt, I live on Cypress Street. Is there something the township could be doing and coming over, overall plan for development so that we're not as vulnerable to these, we got the JFK one, Parkway one, we're just getting like piecemeal, I feel like we need an overall plan for where we're going to put affordable housing.
Yes.
We have to. And then figure out how much market rate units should go into place. Like, what should our town be doing?
I'm not involved in it, but the question is there an overarching plan for dealing with affordable housing?
If we worked on a plan,
Yeah,
would we be less vulnerable?
Yes, yes, and what I understand, and I don't have the details on it, is that is in process, and that it's being worked on before the planning board. Yeah, that's what I understand. For that exact reason, for the exact reason you give. Yeah. Yes.
Barry Brown with the 45 Hillcrest Road. We have a Sun home on the lake, and it's owned by 50 families that have cottages around the lake. There was a major redevelopment that was proposed on a farm property of 100.
I wonder if we could, so that everybody can hear this, gentleman.
So there was a major redevelopment that was planned on an adjacent farm property of a couple hundred acres. I'm the president of the Association of the Lake. We formed a group that began to act when the zoning board, when the planning board was actually meeting. We spent about $150,000, 50 homeowners, we spent about $150,000 in legal costs from start to end. We tied them up for 5 years, but just on the planning board, with issue after issue after issue. The project was modified to try to get compliance, but it was ultimately approved by the town in some form, a reduced form. We took them to court as a town. We got further modifications. The point being, 50 of us spent $150,000 to put a group together. We went to every planning board meeting. We went to every town meeting. And we not only delayed the project, we ended up modifying it very substantially. We have power. This is a wealthy community. And I understand the governing body has its responsibilities, but we also have responsibilities that we can enact if you simply take the steps to do that. It's very doable, certainly for us, if you feel strongly about it.
Beck Barry. Sally Matthew, Clearbrook Road. So, my head's going in circles, sorry. But I'm just, no, it's a good thing. And I appreciate you doing this. I wish that this was done for Matt Haley 5 years ago. I would have been the person that's in here. But my question is, I think this development has already been rezoned for mixed use, right? No, not yet. Oh, okay.
It is
rezoned. Okay. So my question is, if it gets to the planning board part where there's the hearings, from my experience with the Mac Alley, at that point, it's kind of like the point of no return. Because then, no matter how much the public asks for things or modifications, it doesn't generally happen. It's based on what the developer wants. It's really the developer's hands at that point. So are we at that? What stage are we in? Is it before we
Well,
get to that?
the question is, the analogy to the McCallie application, when it got to the planning board heard the developer and not the community. I don't know about that application, but we're not talking about an application before, there's no application pending right now, anywhere. We're at a situation where there's something put on a website, but there's no application that is formally in front of any body. An application in this circumstance would not go to the planning board because you only go to the planning board when you're going with respect to the current zoning. And I explain what the current zoning is. They're not going to go to the planning board to put in one-story over retail. So the next step would perhaps be, I don't know, an application for a variance before the zoning board. That's a whole different kind of a process than the planning board. And that's, I think you spoke.
I have not spoken.
You have not spoken.
I have the lady next to me.
Oh, okay. Your turn.
Lawrence, 36 Hawthorne.
I have two questions about the litigation. So one, if we are in process of developing an affordable housing plan, and that is done soon, does that increase our leverage should litigation occur? Because now we do actually have a plan that we are working on and sort of helps negate the builder's argument?
Your leverage is there when you have a plan that's adopted. Working on a plan is,
No, but in process, so you don't think that helps?
Well, I think it helps. It's better than not being in process, but it is a question of what's the situation when the lawsuit is filed. Being in process isn't being done.
And question number two, in your experience, how long does one of these lawsuits generally take? And what's the cost associated with it? So are they tied up for a long time, where a plan gets adopted
You're
meanwhile?
talking, the question is how long do the lawsuits take and how much do they cost? You're talking about the builder's remedy law. Well, they take a long time.
Okay, yeah.
They take a lot of money.
Yeah.
But they lead to a place of a golden ring for the developer.
Sure, but it sounds like
It
we have a
leads
certain amount of
to,
leverage.
and frankly leads to, there's a big prize at the end of that time and that expense.
Yeah.
I'm just going to stand up because I don't know if you can see me.
Now I do.
Thank you. I'm concerned about, Susan Blackburn, 11 Inwood Road. I'm concerned about your comment that there's a possibility that the entire neighborhood adjacent to this supposed development is going to be declared a blight. I can't even, when you think of 07078, blight is not the word that comes to mind usually. And how is that going to impact the real estate, the ability for us to sell our homes if we wish to leave the township, and also the valuation of our homes, because if the valuation goes down, the taxes that all the surrounding homeowners will be paying will be also going down.
Well, the premise, I think, of your question is that the blight designation, as you call it, and I'm using the word rehabilitation.
Yeah, but you did say blight. You pointed to
That's
it on your
the redevelopment.
on your
That's the
PowerPoint.
redevelopment. Rehabilitation is different, but it's limited to the area. It's not the whole neighborhood. That the area would be defined by the township committee in a narrow way, not to include your house.
So the sewers around our houses, which are 50 years old, aren't going to be rehabilitated. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't know. They might be, but they're not going to be they're not going to be necessarily rehabilitated as we stand here tonight. It's possible that they would be rehabilitated if we have a redevelopment agreement that calls for that. But you're not concerned about your sewers being rehabilitated. You're concerned about your house being blighted and the impact on your property. And I'm not suggesting that the blight designation, even if it was redevelopment or rehabilitation, would cover any residential areas.
Oh, you said it would. You said it would be the whole neighborhood.
No, well.
You said that all the houses around it would benefit from this rehabilitation because we would benefit by having the sewers rebuilt. And I just want to also ask you, by what, there is no way in the world whoever builds on this property is not going to have to rehabilitate his own sewers. I mean, if those sewers need rehabilitation, the builder is going to have to arrange to do it for his own money, not for our taxpayer money.
There's a couple of distinctions to be made here. One is to qualify for the area in need of rehabilitation, you look at the age of the water in the sewer in the delineated area, not the whole neighborhood.
But you said that. You said that.
No, I'm going to explain. What I said was, after that happens, when you're in the process of negotiating the redevelopment agreement, you can perhaps get new water and sewer beyond that area. That's not an option under a municipal land use application as of right, because under the municipal land use, you can only require the developer to improve the infrastructure to the extent that his project requires the improvement. That's not the case in redevelopment. In redevelopment, if you have the leverage, you can have lots of areas redone. That's the context in which I say.
Because I don't understand, if the sewers aren't working properly, isn't that the basic role of our elected government in the township? What are we paying for if we're not paying to have our streets paved properly and our sewers? I mean, I don't understand why someone else has to do it.
Well, I don't know the condition of the sewer, and because the sewage is flowing, doesn't mean it's, I represent sewage authorities, I know too much about sewers. Sewage can be leaking, everything you flush down the toilet, you don't even know it. On the other hand, sewers could be taking in river water and you don't even know it. Both of those things are very bad. And if they're 80 years old, that might be happening. But let me go to this side of the room.
Sorry, Sam Redford, 28 Ridge Terrace. Isn't this site very small for rehabilitation or redevelopment? And the fact that it's both small and owned by one party already, wouldn't that suggest favoritism of some sort? And wouldn't this really be improper for redevelopment or rehabilitation?
That's a good question. That size would be more of a problem with rezoning and spot zoning. With declaring an area in need of rehabilitation or redevelopment, the question isn't spot zoning. The question is, does it meet the criteria that the legislature set up in the statute or not? It's a whole different conversation. And there can be very small areas that can be declared to be in need of redevelopment if they qualify under that standard. But that's a good question. Yes, sir.
Yes. John Fox of Oakview Terrace. Back to the Builders Remedy lawsuit, which hangs over all of this. I don't remember the exact number of housing units that they propose, that the builder proposes, but it doesn't matter. In a hypothetical, if the builder proposes, 10 affordable units in a property, and the town chooses rehabilitation or redevelopment, and in the plan that the town comes up with, they provide 10 or more affordable housing units, doesn't that more or less mute the possibility of that, moot the possibility of a builder's remedy lawsuit?
Well, no, because the builder's remedy is looking at not the site, but it is the township satisfying its constitutional obligation township-wide.
But if they're not providing any more than the town is providing?
Well, but, you know, I don't want to give tips to the builder here. They would allege, they would scrap the plan they have in mind, right?
Okay.
Wouldn't they? They would want
They
something
could afford.
much more robust than what, I don't know the details of what they have, but that's the concern that people have about builder's remedy, is the reward over and above what you would otherwise do. So, oh, yes.
I have a hard time understanding under a zoning change. We're not talking about under the hardship change, because we're not talking about someone who's had the property for 50 years and it's become obsolescent.
Right.
We're talking about someone who's recently bought a building under the current zoning, and now, I mean, they can try to get a change in use based on hardship, but they put themselves in that hardship.
That's only one factor.
I know, but that was one of the things. The other thing I was wondering about was, in any event, will there be a new traffic study done under any of these scenarios? Under the environmental?
Well, typically they are, but we're talking about the future possibilities, and nobody knows which, as we stand here tonight, I don't know what the decision's going to be about which way things are going, so I couldn't assure you one way or the other, definitely, but clearly that's an issue that is on the top of people's minds, and when that happens, this is what comes to the table in these plans and negotiations. I would expect it to happen.
And lastly, it seems like for the gas station at least, it's been vacant for, I don't know, 6 years. So really the baseline is a property that has no traffic at all, not that's got normal traffic, and also part of the Summit Medical Group building. So it's not an incremental increase in traffic. It's really starting from a level of 0 to whatever it is. So it's a much greater impact, and I think that should be also considered.
Yes, sir.
Fred Lieberberg, 36 Kilmer Drive. I'm a little confused here. Under the current zoning, this is a B3 zone, they're permitted uses. So suppose the developer, obviously, let's say they think they want to put up 4 stories, 75,000 square feet. Based under the current zoning, let's say hypothetically, they can only put up half of that. And the town says, you can do whatever is permitted in the B3 zone. And obviously the builder is not going to be happy because he maybe only be able to put up half of what he wants. But why should the town grant him a variance? We're complying with what is in the B3 zone, and let the developer, you can do whatever you want in the B3 zone, but you can't have more than 2 stories. So I don't understand what the issue is for, I don't know what legs the developer has to stand on here. He's only going to be able to build approximately half of what he wants to do.
Focus the attention to this gentleman. The question is, why would the town grant a variance when there's a perfectly good zoning there?
We're not discriminating against him.
No, we need to break down who is in charge of the decision about a variance. It's not these people.
I understand that.
It's a different board that doesn't have the ability to decide what they want. It's not their choice. They have to hear the evidence. They have to act in a quasi-judicial, like judges. Right. They have to base their decision on evidence and say, oh, we don't want this. They have to have solid basis in the evidence to turn it down, and they might. But
it's zoned a certain way, isn't that solid base?
Traffic, density,
no, because the
They might not also.
I can only hear one person at a time. I think I heard, but there's a zone, and that's enough. It's in the zoning. But the very nature of a variance, which is allowed in the law, is to provide an opportunity to change the zone through the zoning board of adjustment that hears the evidence that's presented. I'm not presuming that they would get a variance. I'm just telling you they might get a variance, but I also emphatically say if the Board of Adjustment denies a variance, that's not the end. Because the next step is the courthouse. And the court has the power to overturn the zoning board of adjustment if they haven't grounded their decision on solid evidence in the record. So it's a rigorous process. It's not, we don't like it, it's got this.
Hi, Larry Nesser. So is your, are you saying that, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to understand, are you saying that it may be better, two-part question, in some circumstances to not fight it and negotiate, because if you don't, if it goes to variance, then you're rolling the dice, and you might lose everything, and it could be a 12-story, right? Is that sort of what you're saying? Like, it's a choice between...
You know, it is what I'm saying on this screen. Wait a minute. That's what I'm saying on that screen.
Right.
That is intended to be like a horizontal thermometer of control, least control, most control.
So in your experience, though, in similar situations, when people do the one on the left and say, you know what, we're going to roll the dice and hope we don't lose control, how often does it happen in towns like this, in modern day? Like, how often does the variance get granted and the town is going back saying, like, God, we should have negotiated? Like,
I have either been involved in or am aware of situations where people in government are upset about variances that have been granted by boards of adjustment.
and they wish they would have negotiated before it got to the court.
Yes, right. They wish that they had more control and didn't allow it to go the variance route. I know of a number of cases like that. And the next step is change the members of the zoning board, but that's only partially effective because the decision must be grounded on evidence in the record. It's not a question of discretion.
Got it. And then, sorry, the last part's a very quick one. this is not my area, so I don't know. Is the, I know it's not them, you've said it many times, that grant the variance. Who does?
The zoning board of adjustment.
And is the zoning board of adjustments a Millburn specific only?
Yes. And once they do that,
Yeah.
it's over. Just tell them.
Are they,
No, they're appointed by the mayor.
I'll tell you.
I guess there's no more questions.
Yes,
one-
we have public comment.
Back behind me, I'm sorry.
Susan Steinberg, Myrtle Avenue. Okay, so the way I understand it from you is that, yes, there is a zone, but there's the ability to get a variance. The law provides for that, and you have to have a legal reason to not provide the variance. Is that correct?
Well,
That there has
the
to be
burden is on
flexibility.
the applicant to prove that they're entitled to
That they're entitled to it, right.
Yeah,
So flexibility is provided in the law. So,
Well, it's not flexible, it's an opportunity to get a variance to change the zones.
okay. Okay, and it can go, if the variance is denied, they can then go to court to fight it. But wouldn't our zoning board of adjustment, as professional as they are, know from the outset whether such a lawsuit would really have any chance? I mean, based upon their experience, wouldn't they know whether their decision was solid or not? In other words, it's not a crapshoot. They know
Well,
whether it's a solid decision.
every decision made by any body, governing body that I represent, they always think that they're gonna win, but they don't always win. So, you know, that's not their choice, it's up to somebody else. I'm
With
gonna
the
come back to you
variance?
if I've got, who hasn't spoken yet? Yes.
I listened to a lot of continuing legal education on affordable housing as an update. And in particular one case in Cranford, they got upset with them pushing them to the side and saying, you're supposed to get a variance, go get a variance, and not dealing with the developer. And they pretty much said, you knew that they don't go and get a variance when they have affordable housing. So I don't know why we're wasting time talking about them going for a variance when they know they don't need a variance. They can just get a builder's remedy or come to the township committee, they do an overlay, do something like you're saying. But this whole variance thing is not happening with affordable housing. Used as a sword, which is basically what it is. It's being used as a sword to overbuild on a 1 acre lot.
So what you're saying is the more likely scenario would be that a disgruntled property owner wouldn't bother with a variance, would go with a builder's remedy. I'm not gonna debate that. That sounds like that could be the case. Again, you know, it's a crapshoot. Yes?
If the zoning committee grants the variance, is that the end of it, or the town can bring a lawsuit to the courthouse to appeal this decision?
Yes.
They're us.
No, that could go.
Well, the township
So
never-
basically, we appeal our own decision, but it's a different body.
Yeah, I mean, it can be challenged. The question is, if the zoning board grants the variance, can there still be a lawsuit? Yes, there can. There can be a challenge. This gentleman over here talked about how citizens can mobilize under certain circumstances. Other parties can be involved. Yes.
Mhm. And is it possible to run a dual track? So, for example, the town rejects the variance, and then the developer goes to the zoning board. And in the zoning board, yeah, so as the
I have to stop you because the first thing you said, the town rejects the variance, and then they go to the zoning board. The zoning board is the body that grants or denies the variance, not the town.
I see. So so the variance is rejected, the
Yeah.
builder goes to the courthouse. And
Yes, right.
during the process of the lawsuit, as both parties present evidence and we kind of can see where the lawsuit goes, can we still go with redevelopment, those routes, kind of to make the case moot and go with other routes?
It wouldn't make the case moot. Unless the developer agreed, you know, the parties agreed. But it doesn't, it's not something you could bring into the courthouse and say, Judge, we have a different way we're gonna do this. The judge is still gonna look at the merits of the challenge to the decision of the Board of Adjustment.
Unless the builder drops it. I see.
Yes.
Carrie Hall, 56 Byron. Just in further observation of whether a developer will go to the Board of Adjustment or redevelopment in some form, would you tell people that at the Board of Adjustment what the criteria is for getting an approval as compared to Township
Yes.
Committee and Planning Board in terms of
Yeah, I
number
did,
of
I
votes?
put that up on the screen before you
But
came.
I think now make it clear, I don't think people really know that you need more votes.
Well, yes, you need to have convinced. And, so here's the criteria for the use variance. Must satisfy, the applicant must satisfy both positive and negative criteria. And that's the question of presenting evidence to the Board of Adjustment. It's a trial type hearing. It is, witnesses are sworn, witnesses are cross-examined, opposing witnesses are presented. People can present their objections, but it's all based upon creating a record that is then reviewed by a court after a vote by the Board of Adjustment.
But you need a supermajority.
You need a supermajority.
At the Board of Adjustment
Right.
as compared to, and this Board of Adjustment is made up of residents similar to the people that are here.
Yes, that's right. And so what I've been saying is one scenario we've talked about is the Board of Adjustment denies the variance. That's what I think you're implying. But then it's not a home run, because then the next step is the courthouse. And maybe the judge will affirm the denial. That's certainly possible. But it could go the other way.
Joe, excuse me, if that were to happen and it goes to court, those litigation fees becomes the town's responsibility or the residents who would get in their own group together? Like who then, how does that go to court and where do all those fees come from?
Well, there's an example where citizens can get together and hire their own lawyer and take it to court and they would pay.
So it wouldn't be the township committee or the township paying for that?
Well, if there was a challenge, you know, we're really speculating, right?
Okay, well, let's
We're
speculate what that's going to cost.
Okay.
Who's paying?
So, the variance is denied,
Mhm.
and there's a challenge.
Okay.
The town is, through its budgetary system, is going to provide the funding to the Board of Adjustments Council to defend that decision, I would think.
and then the residents, if they have their own.
They may also join in, right? And maybe other people will join in. So there's lots of scenarios.
Joe, I have a question following up. When somebody asked earlier about, what if we do nothing and what about traffic? If right now they wanted to build banks, which are permissible in the B3 zone, and that bank gave away free money, so there was so much traffic that nobody could get through, that's not something that we can control, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's okay. They can put it in a bank and give you away money.
So much
Yeah, exactly.
There's no 100 bouquets.
I can take pictures from my house of everyone going to get their free money.
But is that true? There's no guide rails on traffic? Like you can have unlimited traffic and just in a town?
Even in a school zone.
Because you said there's nothing you could do.
There's some controls, but it's very much restricted.
But there are guardrails on what can happen
Yeah,
and what can't.
there are, certainly, but it's not what we're talking about with other options where we choose to control.
So we lose control. If they do what's within the
Right.
B3 zone, we don't have any control over it.
Well, yes, we do, because you've set the zoning.
I hate to ask this question now, but what are they actually proposing? What is actually on the table? I have no clue of what we're talking about, other than legal words.
82 units and 10,000 square feet of some medical.
Where the,
3 to 4
because I live on
stories tall.
Woodland.
Four
That
stories,
if you ever have 14.
four stories all the way down Woodland.
All the way down?
All the way
They're
down,
gonna go
even
through
in the
the
little
park?
tiny
The whole
panhandle.
park, yeah.
They're gonna go through the park and all the crap that's
All
put in the
four
sewers there,
Yes.
that eventually gets all the way drained down to the house across the street from me, that there's always having somebody clean out all the time? Is that where it is?
Yes.
No, I don't know
That's
either,
it.
that's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Wonderful, and we're thinking about approving this? You ought to be there in the morning when the garbage collectors come, and they ream out the toilets down there.
Or school pickup.
Yeah, yeah.
Morning and
Little crossing.
And with all the kids running.
We're worrying about chickens, you know? We're not worried about dogs. And we're worrying about a whole street full of cats. This is government at its best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to open it up now to public discussion. We have another meeting after this meeting. When invited to, you can line up. There's when invited to speak, select your and clearly state your name and address. Speak into the podium microphone so your comments can be understood by all and properly recorded. If you're reading from a prepared statement, you give a copy to the township clerk or email it to her office at sugati@millburn.org. You're limited to 3 minutes. Have a pop watcher again. And please, if you can try not to repeat what others have said. That would be great. We want to hear what you have to say. So, that is
Hi, I'm Emily Bogolia, live at 201 Cobart Avenue, directly across the street from this proposed project. I just want to start by saying, I'm not opposed to development there. I'm opposed to a 4-story building there, or a 3-story building there. I'd like to know how many of you live in the Glenwood section that this will impact directly, like it will most of us. Also, before you've commented on an easement being removed because it impacted the property value, the seller could not sell their home. What do you think that this is going to do to our home values? And third, you mentioned turf fields at the golf course. Let's use this space for turf fields. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hold on, I'm going to ask you guys not to clap. I know, look, we understand that the majority of you feel pretty strongly about this project. But just to move this along, I'm just gonna ask you, it's also a business meeting, so I appreciate, and we all appreciate how you feel about the project or the proposed project, but we want to hear from you, and so let's hear from you.
Can I distribute pictures of the site to you guys?
Sure.
Okay, before the clock starts?
Put them in corners. The right hand side, right hand.
I want the clock to start.
I'm just gonna stand here like that
Okay, thank you. All right. And go. Okay, Deborah Nevis, 65 Millwood Road, Short Hills. I would like to address several statements made by the Silverman Group at their January 2017 presentation to you. First, Silverman's planner, Michael Tobia, expressed a lot of ideas about what he would like you to do with our zoning ordinances, all of which would benefit Silverman and few of which would benefit actual residents of the township. He stated his desire to make the Silverman application a variance-free one and expressed a wish to not end up with 10 variances after going through all the work of introducing, designing, and rezoning this project. Silverman would recommend certain adjustments to Millburn zoning, he said, to make this work and make it a variance-free application. I personally have done construction on 2 homes in Short Hills and only wish that I could have come to you and made recommendations for certain adjustments to Millburn zoning ordinance so that I could also have had a variance-free application. Mr. Torbia also expressed a desire to have this project embraced by the community. As you can see by the turnout tonight, as the proposed project currently stands, the community most definitely does not. I was also struck by several statements that Silverman's architect David Minnow made at the January 2017 presentation. In particular, he stated that he had looked at the grades to see if those residing on Hobart Avenue would be able to see this project from their homes, and concluded they would not. Perhaps Mr. Minnow does not realize that Chatham Road is downhill from Hobart Avenue. I provided you with a series of photos. I think they speak for themselves. The first 8 show the current view from Hobart over the railroad tracks and down onto Chatham. The 1-story gas station, 2-story dentist office, and 2-story SMG building are all clearly visible. There are also 4 photos that demonstrate through the use of balloons just how tall these buildings would be if actually constructed. I would also like to express my concern about the impact of this development on the Arboretum, which borders the site. The Arboretum serves as a sanctuary for migratory birds. Mr. Minnow described this project as one that would have lots of glass. Studies have shown the mortal danger glass in buildings can pose to migratory birds. The Arboretum is also home to many bats. Artificial lighting from increased development is posing a threat to bat populations worldwide. Imagine the impact a dark corner of the Arboretum suddenly lighting up every night when 62 apartment dwellers turn on their lights would have. My opposition to this project is about size and density. As proposed, it is wholly inappropriate for this neighborhood and needs to be significantly reworked. Mr. Tobia, Silverman's planner, stated that he thought there was a lot of zoning on the site right now that works for Silverman. I'd like to suggest that the 2-story height limit that currently is a part of the B3 zoning ordinance for this site continues to be one of the zoning ordinances Silverman is required to work with if they want to proceed with this project. Thank you.
Jim Feely from 46 Crescent Place. I have a few questions. As a point of fact, does Silverman actually own all the properties in the parcel, or has he optioned them?
It's our understanding he owns them. Or it owns it.
He's made such a legal representation, okay? Second, do any of the existing properties have variances?
You know what, make your statement, because we.
I'll make that question, and I would appreciate somebody who would follow up on this.
Okay.
And, let's see, and also, has anyone in the township calculated the square footage he's allowed under the current zoning versus his proposal? And also the lot coverage percentage, so that we have some informed consent to what's going on. And lastly, and I don't mean to insult anyone here, but I think in interest of full disclosure, the people making these decisions, you members of the township committee, and the people who are on the Board of Adjustment, what is their relationship financially with developers, whether they're part of this project or not? Have they received campaign contributions from developers? And if any of the members of these boards of adjustment are also developers. Thank you.
I am Peter Van Sant from 322 Taylor Road South. I do appreciate you listening, and we've all been watching you attentively, and you have been listening. We appreciate that. I have a buddy named Robert Portnoff who lives in Millburn. He works for Pargas Group. He's one of the top architects in the world. His firm right now is building the new Academy Awards building in Los Angeles. And he warned me about this meeting tonight. He goes, there's two things I want to warn you about. If this group comes up with a blight recommendation or a rehabilitation recommendation, that is their end run around citizens. Because it does fast track, and he's built all over the United States. It fast tracks these projects and limits the input that any of us will have. And I hope you, in our honor, since you are our representatives and this is our community, that you work together to not give it that designation. Facing you is a group of concerned citizens who have learned late in the game. You notice how many people, by the way, let's flip the agenda next time. Let's have the comments at the top. We've lost 50% of our citizens here to comment tonight, and that's not right. And as the word spreads on this, the more people I tell about it, it's a unanimous, they want to come. I mean, next time they have to have this meeting at the high school gym, and maybe the time after that at the football stadium. This is not a project that has support in this community. Not that we don't want rehabilitation of that area. We want something done. It is that gas station, for goodness sakes. And I think you guys are open to this. 64 loft apartments is just too big. It's like having a 6-foot-tall student in a second grade class. It stands out, and for all the wrong reasons. I don't understand this creeping urbanization in a neighborhood of family homes and garden-style apartments whose design and architecture fit into the surrounding neighborhood. This one does not. It looks like an apartment complex. I've been in all 50 states, and I travel constantly, just in Houston recently. It looks more appropriate for a Houston neighborhood than a Short Hills. Those of you who ran for office, did you put this project at the front of your campaign? Did you say, vote for me? I want to bring this 64-unit, 4-story monstrosity, I call it the Silverman Wall, next to our Arboretum and change your lifestyle. Vote for me. No, you didn't. Because none of you, and look at me, each of you know this. No, you, sir, you did a great job. None of you would have this go in across the street from you. None of you. Because it changes all of our quality of life. About 2 months ago, I wrote each of you about our concerns. I heard back from one. That's not democracy in action, folks. And what is it the Washington Post says? Democracy dies in darkness. We need to know what you are thinking. And you guys care so much about this community, and you do some great things. But we need to know what your thinking is. Where are you leaning? And please listen to us making this project a respectable, beautiful thing it can be. And please listen to these voices. Thank you very much.
Don't start the clock. It's going to go over when I talk. No. My name is Joe Esposito. I was born in town. I grew up across from St. Rose. I moved over to Hartshorn Poets area. The town's a special place for me. Went to high school here. I had Sloppy Joe's. I had the Strata Pizza. I worked at Breck's Garden Center before it was turned into an office building. I live now at 80 Brindlebrook. I spent 14 years in Brooklyn, Carroll Gardens, and while a tree does grow in Brooklyn, they grow better out here. And so I moved my family out here, and I have 3 girls. My oldest is at Glenwood. We love the Arboretum. My daughter, Ruby, I might get a little emotional. My daughter Ruby has classes there. Growing up, I went to hikes, and I had birthday parties there with my mom. It was a special place. It's a refuge and a haven in this town for us. And I know we have South Mountain, and we had Watchung, but Stuart Hartshorn gave this as a gift, this tract of land to Cora, his daughter. And it's not just an arboretum, it's a bird sanctuary. And I don't want to talk about chickens, but there are over 120 species of birds that call home, or that are migratory or pass through the arboretum. You guys, I didn't want to kill trees, so I just...
We will.
Okay, you can pass it through. I'm not into ornithology. I'm not a birder per se. I like to hike, and I like to look at my surroundings. And there are some amazing things I've seen. And actually, three, just to point out that that's in that pamphlet, are actually endangered species and threatened wildlife in the state of New Jersey and nationally. One of them is the barred owl, peregrine falcon, amazing, right in town. And these are just three that I've seen. There's many more on that list. And the red-shouldered hawk. The red-shouldered hawk is endangered in New Jersey. It's threatened federally. So it's not just a bird sanctuary, it's this oasis for migrating birds. And I know this other woman that's spoken about the lights and all of that. A lot of that comes into play. Apartments backing up to this reserve bring unwanted disruption and pose a threat. They bring noise, lights that can disrupt migratory pattern of birds. They bring trash and garbage. Cars bring noise, pollution, and deadly waste products like oil and antifreeze on the ground. I know there's a parking lot there now. Apartments, though, people work on their cars. People might do stuff. People might spill antifreeze. That stuff is detrimental to our environment. I don't like looking at the defunct gas station on Chatham Road, believe me. But I don't think that erecting apartments on the proposed site, I do think that erecting apartments on the proposed site would have Cora and Stuart turning in their graves. I'm all for development. It's appropriate for the community. I'd love to see it turn into a library or something for the children.
My name is Ann Leverson, and I live at 3 Factory Drive. It is important for the township and the mayor to be aware of any conflicts of interest that particularly concern the Chatham Road project proposed by the Silverman Group in order to maintain a fair and ethical outcome with integrity. It has come to my attention that Mayor Burstein, according to her own words, stated in her profile on her law firm's website, has a legal practice that is largely specific to commercial construction matters. She represents builders. At her law firm, Mandelbaum Salzberg, she is part of the Commercial and Corporate Litigation Unit, which lists construction law as part of their practice. The law firm of Mandelbaum Salzberg also has a large real estate unit, which comprises representation of clients who engage in development of complex mixed-use, residential, commercial, and industrial property, among other aspects of real estate law. Excuse my voice. The Township Committee, the Planning Board, and the Zoning Board have always had its members recuse themselves from hearing an applicant or deciding an issue where there was even a perception of a conflict of interest. This practice is, to me, just proper professional conduct. I would respectfully ask our mayor to recognize her conflict and recuse herself from any and all meetings with the Silverman Group that pertain to the Chatham Road project. This would eliminate any question of a conflict of interest and would serve the mayor and the town well. I would further respectfully request that any mayor of the Township Committee or above-mentioned boards that have any association, such as a business relationship, a family relationship, or a friendship with the Silverman Group and its Chatham Road project, also recuse themselves. Thank you.
Mayor, I may just make an observation at that point. There is a very clear bright line that is drawn by the municipal local government ethics law. I have the privilege of chairing the ethics committee for the AEA, the Association of Environmental Authorities. And the observations you made, and I don't know all the facts, don't cross that line. Now, there may be more facts that I don't know about, but I think that it's clear to it's clear that the implication that because one has clients in the same industry creates a conflict of interest is not the standard. It's not the standard in the law.
May I approach the clerk?
Oh, I'm not in charge of that.
Okay. Excuse me.
Thank you very much.
Well, just for the record, my firm does not represent the zoning board.
I'm Greg Blackburn, 11 Inwood Road. We live in a little neighborhood, kind of just like right tucked into the Arboretum behind the current property. I'd give you my notes, but you might not be able to read my handwriting, so I'll just kind of wing it. And I'm only here, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a designer, I work with architects, and again, we're really sensitive to the design of what gets built. None of us are opposed to having something built or whatever. The thing that is like, I'm only here as a father of a Glenwood daughter and a dog walker and a commuter, and we're really, really sensitive to the construction, demolition, carting, construction, parking. You know, our streets are very tiny. We don't even have sidewalks. They're Belgian block gutters. And there's got to be a very strict policy of some kind of township regulation and oversight to what's going on with the contractors there, no matter what happens. Again, I'm opposed to, like, if a chicken coop needs 20 feet, I don't know why, like, residentials don't either. You know, I was in front of the zoning board for my own renovation, and they should be held to the same, if not more stringent standards than a taxpaying township resident of 24 years. So, yeah, thank you. So you have to say
Bill Kirsch, 93 Cedar Street. Well, it's been a long night, and I would save this for another evening, but I don't see any short nights on the horizon. So I'm going to totally change the subject. And I want to address the Township Committee. Twice last year, I spoke to the possibility of the Township Committee going on record regarding the behavior of our president, apart from his policies. As the second year begins, I want to bring to your attention once again the continuing divisiveness and dishonesty of the current chief executive. Since taking office, President Trump has continually and personally attacked our federal judges and courts, the FBI, the Department of Justice, senators, generals, activists, and our allies around the world. He has done this when they commit one common sin: to disagree with him or oppose him in any way. He has likewise attacked and threatened print and other media, calling them, quote, the enemy of the American people, simply because they have dared to disagree with, contradict, or correct him. Not with logic or argument or even respect, but simply because they contest his actions, opinions, or misstatements. They are labeled as unpatriotic or enemies. Even more often, the president has simply made things up, one after the other. That millions of people voted illegally in California, that he had the largest inauguration turnout or biggest electoral victory, that he saved money on military projects that were already determined before he took office, and on, right up until his that last Tuesday's State of the Union address was watched by, quote, the highest number in history. Our president is always elected by a minority of the entire population to represent the entirety of that population, to each other and to the world on our behalf. We the people have differences, but we are one nation bound by common institutions and basic beliefs. We are not perfect, but we try to treat each other with honesty and respect. We deserve a president who is worthy of our character and our aspirations, and it is our responsibility to demand that in our top representative, not to accept anything less. I therefore ask the committee once again to condemn this president's continuing behavior and a resolution citing specific instances like those I have mentioned here tonight, and not to assent to it in silence. Thank you.
Very briefly, Edie Shear, 101 Oakview Terrace. The gentleman over on the wall there had asked the township, the individual members of the township committee, to please tell us what is your vision for this Chatham Road property. I think, and we were told this wasn't the time, and I think the inference was you would tell us during public comment. I think that there's a cynicism and a concern among the residents of Glenwood and other residents in the township that we just may be sold down the river here. And so when we hear general discussions of negotiations, that's very vague. If the achievement is going to be a few less units or something better in the sewer system, that's not what we want. So we would like to know, what are your aims for what are you aiming at in terms of this development, if we could ask?
I don't know that any of us is aiming at anything at the moment. I mean, one of the questions is what are we going to do, and that's a discussion that the township committee has to have in public before we can even go to the next step. So if we wind up in front of a planning board with a development, trying to prepare a development plan, then it will be in concert with the public as to what they want.
Well, you know that the public wants only 2 stories. I don't believe that that is your goal here.
Our goal is to represent the township as a whole, to do the best we can and come up with the best plan that we can, assuming that that's what we want to do, and decide not to. Listen, our options are, do we do nothing, or do we move forward and come up with some sort of a plan in concert with our planner, in concert with other things, and in concert with the public. I understand that you don't believe that. I can see it in your face that you don't believe it, but that's what we need to do. And so what we would do is, when the time is right, have everybody who is interested and wants to be heard come to this and eventually come up with something that, is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to make everybody happy? Probably not. As I heard tonight, not everybody is opposed to, as I heard tonight, this is what I heard tonight, that there are people who don't oppose something, whatever it may be, whether it's 2 stories, okay, I heard that. I don't know what ultimately we can do. I don't know what the plan will look like.
Well, I would venture to say that I don't know of a single soul in town that wants this 4-story, 3- and 4-story monstrosity. So there is no support for it.
I understand.
There's only.
I think we all understand that there's no support for that. We get that. We heard you.
Thank you. Only opposition.
Understood.
Hi, Gary Butter, Old Patrol Way.
You're going to call us bums again?
It all depends which way you vote. And hope no offense is taken. As Mr. Van Zant said, it does sound like rehabilitation is the best option for the developer, and probably the least best option for the residents. And the same thing might be true with respect to reconstruction. I mean, just looking at the standard for the variance, it seems like they'd be hard pressed to prove they should be entitled to a variance that is 4 stories high, the height of those balloons. And so I guess that leaves us with respect to the business remedy, and there's been varying comments today with respect to how fearful we need to be of that. So I would greatly appreciate if maybe that was studied more in depth by the township to see how much we have to fear that. And the fact that my quick Googling business, the builder's remedy, is that it gets decided by a special master. I would tend to think that a special master looking at our neighborhood would also think that something 4 stories high would not be appropriate. And so it just seems that to the extent that the builder might be trying to provide scare tactics, and I don't know whether it is or it isn't, because this is my first day really looking into all this, I think that you should be very reluctant to succumb to what may just be idle threats. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Dave Cosgrove, 99 Oakview. I submitted a statement earlier today. Did everyone get it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not going to repeat that, but the question I have is really the same question I had last month. Since our last meeting, what's occurred with this project? And I mean that very broadly. I don't want to play like a lawyer game that who talked to who emailed, but has anybody been in communication or any communication received by the developer to you folks? Okay, any individual meetings or collective meetings with the developer?
To my knowledge.
Okay, not to your knowledge, tell me what that means, please.
I have no knowledge of anyone's meeting with them.
Thank you.
Carrie Strasburg, under Plus, and I know we're all tired, but I just wanted to thank you for bringing this nice guy Joe here tonight. Because, like, as of December, not you, because you weren't here yet, but, you know, y'all were just like, what project? What plan? Like, there was, like, people were already coming and asking, like Debbie and other people already coming and asking about it, and it was like, oh, there's nothing before us. We have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, there might be something. And when we asked for more communication and transparency and advocacy, this is exactly what we were talking about, bringing a nice guy named Joe to really help us understand what's going on. Because Matt Calley kind of seemed to sneak up on most people, and there's 200 apartments that are going to be on Canoe Road, and there's going to be X number of students for Hartshorn to educate, and we may have to redistrict again and figure that out. So obviously any development that could have impact on the schools is very close to all of our hearts and wallets. So I would just like to echo Peter in really wanting you guys to be forthright in advocating for what you believe the community wants and needs, because it's indisputable that people are advocating. So, thank you.
Thank you. May I say something? Sure. I've heard many people speak about the Arboretum, and I think it would be a great idea if the board, the president of the Arboretum would come and speak on behalf of the Arboretum.
No, he doesn't represent the interests of the Arboretum. People,
You know what, I don't know if the president, but perhaps, Taylor might be somebody who.
That would be helpful.
I'm attending the Arboretum meeting on Thursday.
Would you put a personal invitation that he should come and speak? I think Taylor, it would make much more sense for it to be Taylor anyways. Okay, that would be helpful.
that's not his Arboretum. His opinion is just his personal opinion.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
That's not his Arboretum, even his chairman. His opinion is his personal opinion. We never know his relationship with the developer, and people even talk about their relationship.
You could ask him.
He is a developer.
He does
these kind of developments. We heard from him.
We're not talking about him. We're not talking about him. We're talking about, okay.
Or
Let's
both.
move on.
Well, people have talked about the Arboretum so about the
But it makes
impact.
much more sense to have Taylor to speak about it than.
Yeah, we talk birds.
Okay.
I'm Sam Redford from 28 Ridge Terrace, which is the corner of Woodland, and one of the closest residents
Sorry,
is Sam Redford.
Redford, thank you. I'm
One
sorry.
of the closest residents to this project. I want to point out, we have zoning rules for a reason. I think we have a very sensible two-level zoning in that area. We don't have any exceptions to it right now that I can think of. All of the buildings in that area are two. We haven't approved any variances in the past that allow people to build a 3-story or 4-story building. And so there's no precedent for that sort of thing right now. And this is a very central location in Short Hills. It's a modest road with a fair amount of traffic already because of the train station right there. And I think, I wanted to ask you, not to be cowed by threats of, Mount Laurel decision housing, and we don't have enough affordable housing in town. This is not a field on the edge of town, as we've seen in the past. This is right in the center of town, and there's really no basis for putting in a high-density project which is completely out of step with the zoning. And I can't imagine that a zoning board of adjustment would, that normally allow somebody to be, 5 foot closer to their property line than, is allowed or something. They say, oh yeah, we should have, a project of 3 times the density and twice the height of the zoning, whatever it is. So I just want to encourage everybody to just stand firm and take a stand and say, no, that's not reasonable, and we're not going to go for that here.
Thank you.
I don't have much to say. I spent a lot of time making this nice banner. I want to give this to our elected officials.
Thank you. Good job.
Before I leave, I just want to say one quick thing. Susan Steinberg, Myrtle Avenue. So right now they have on their website a rendering of this 4-story thing for that site, saying coming soon or something to that effect.
Back on?
Is it there or is it not? That's what I'm asking. Oh, they took it down. Okay, because that's what I was going to ask is, do we as a town have any remedy to tell them to cease and desist?
We do.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
I'll applaud that.
Again, sorry, I wanted to ask a follow-up question to a question that I had posed last time I was here. I had made a request for the Township Committee to consider a density ordinance for the B3 zone because none exist at the present time, and I'm just following up to find out what the status of that request is.
That's not what I understood your request. I thought your request was asking whether we had one.
No, I know we don't have one.
Okay.
No, my request last time was, can you please make one?
I misunderstood your request. No, seriously, I misunderstood.
Okay, so let me just be clear. Could you please put in a density ordinance for a B3 zone? Because none exist at the present time.
We'll look at it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, one more quick comment. I live in the historic district. Okay, when we renovated our house 10 years ago, I had to jump through hoops. We had lot coverage requirements, we couldn't change the facade of the house my husband grew up in. I mean, the house has been there, and we changed it, and we did what we had to do, but now I'll be looking at a 4-story building, living in the historic district. Has the historic district weighed in on this at all? Historic committee.
You mean, has the historic preservation?
Historic committee weighed in on this at all?
Probably wouldn't have jurisdiction because it's not in the district, right? All right. Anything else? Come on.
Just want to make sure they're all done. Larry Hall, 56 Byron. Alex, this is a follow-up from complete street budget. $8.2 million was bonded, and the 4.6 is the final number that we spent. I came late to the meeting. Do we have any counting? It was promised at the last meeting, so let me start with
I did not. I didn't promise it at the last meeting, but I did.
Well, the mayor did. I can quote.
Well, I think in the end, as far as the bond anticipation note, I believe it is 4.6 that's in there for the, I can get you the exact number. I'll talk to you offline.
That's not, well, I want, it's 8.2 million less some
I
number.
just don't know.
What was specifically said at the last meeting is a follow-up to my question, standing here. Complete street budget, how much have we spent? I didn't get an answer. Alyssa Sutton followed that up and asked of the mayor, when will we see complete street breakout of costs, what we spent, the mayor. At the next meeting, that's what he, referring to me, asked for. So this is now 3 weeks later. What are the exact costs that we have either expended, incurred,
to this
billed to date, including Flanagan, Arterial, Bowman? If you want to put police outside to tell us that's not a new complete street. We'd like to know what's left, both from a downtown perspective as a taxpayer perspective. When will we have a full line item at the end of the year certainly that bond, we know what's left of that
Well,
8.2.
I think it's more, in terms of what has been spent thus far, what has been approved at township committee meetings and what has, that can
different.
certainly, yes, but what is still outstanding and possibly negotiated under.
Can we find out what has been invoiced?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have it on me right now, but I can certainly get that.
Mayor, if
to
I
you.
may ask, you promised to a lot of people here at the last meeting that we would have this tonight. We've asked for it and asked for it and asked for it. Committeewoman Iglo has asked for it, others have asked for it. Why do we not just have that number? It's an easy math question. Oh, she's looking to.
That's one thing I just didn't in my notes follow up with.
The reason, just in terms of going forward on
Yeah,
complete
fine.
streets or not, and which the follow-up question. To the Township Committee, last meeting, 2016, sorry, Joe, you were the last one here, didn't know a lot about it, but the Township Committee at that meeting, for the public, $3.4 million in addition was authorized, actually, also, 3.4. We really didn't know what was, I didn't even, at that meeting, it was done so quickly, things were not posted, the agendas and items. $3.4 million for, as Ted said that night, we may need a little more money. We have no phase 2 plan. We have no more budget with arterial. Money is spent, done, and gone. We've got 3.4 million. Alex, I know you think no, but I'm happy to give me more than 3 minutes here, and I'll go through it with you also. It's more than, but I
I
don't
would
want
like to speak to you offline about it.
Not on my time.
Okay.
We have a $3.4 million bond authorized out there, but we have nowhere to spend on it. We have no plan. We should get that off the books for the event that I'm not here, if any one of you are not here, the public's not here. We should not be spending that money without full due diligence after the way $8.2 million or some portion of it has been spent. I would just ask and make that request to consider repealing that 3.4. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Oh, motion to go into closed session.
We've been adjourned.
Quick.